Excellencies, distinguished delegates, our CFS stakeholders, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the second day or day 2 of the 47th session of the Committee on World Food Security CFS. And yesterday we had a good start of the meeting. We had fruitful discussions on the HLPE report, building a global narrative toward 2030. And also would like to thank for all of your contribution, your active participation to share your views to address through this plenary. For today, the agenda item 3, the global thematic events, framework for action for food securities and nutrition in protected crisis. We know that the situation right now are conflict, natural disaster, poverty, inequalities, and others cause food insecurities and malnutrition. And that's why at CFS 44, we agree to hold such monitoring events at the plenaries every 2 years. And this year, we will monitor the use and applications of the CFS Framework for Action for Food Securities and Nutrition in Protected Crisis, Cfs Ffa. I would like to show you this framework, this guideline, to make sure that you are familiar with. And if you don't, please visit the CFS website, and also to make sure that all the CFS policy products, it really brings to be used at your country, and also to make sure that the CFS policy products can make an impact values at the local and national level. Thank you very much. The overall objective of the FFA approved in 2015 is to improve the food security and nutrition of population affected by or at least of protected crisis in a way that address underlying causes such as conflict, natural disasters, poverty, inequalities, or occupation. Thus, the contributing to the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security. It provides a comprehensive set of 11 interconnected and complementary principles to address situations of or at risk of protected crisis. Today's event is not only an opportunity for CFS members and stakeholders to take note of and discuss the summary report of contribution received from 2 open calls for inputs, experiences, and good practices on how to promote dissemination, use, and application of the CFS Ffa principle at all levels. It also provides an opportunity to reflect on the CFS Ffa policy convergence process and follow-up process as well. To guide us to our discussion today, our moderators is Mr. Ronald Hartman, Director of Global Engagement, Partnerships, and Resource Mobilization at IFAD, who will outline the event objectives, expected results, and introduce our speakers of morning session. And I wish you all have a fruitful discussion. And I would like to emphasize that the design of these plenaries, we would like to give more time for our members, our stakeholders, to ensure that your voice are heard and you can address to the plenaries. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hartman. Now the floor is yours, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning from Rome. As you're all acutely aware, food insecurity and undernutrition are the most serious and common manifestations of protracted crisis, which disrupts both livelihoods and food systems, particularly for those that are most vulnerable in our societies. Although each protracted crisis is different, there are a number of common underlying factors, including conflict, man-made and natural disasters, natural resource pressures, climate change, inequalities, the prevalence of poverty, and governance factors. The important objective of the Cfs Ffa Framework, as the Chair has just outlined, is to improve the food security and nutrition of populations affected by protracted crisis. And it does this by addressing critical issues, building resilience, adapting to specific challenges, and contributing to addressing the underlying causes. Today's event is informed to draw out the experiences and good practices received from a broad range of stakeholders of how the Cfs Ffa was applied in situations of or at risk of becoming protracted crisis. Today's global thematic event will focus on two specific areas. Firstly, how the framework principles were customized to particular contexts and the specific needs of affected and at-risk populations. And secondly, we'll try to draw out and identify good practices, but also the main constraints and challenges in using the framework principles for improving food security and nutrition in protracted crisis situations. As the Chair outlined, the structure of today's event is designed to be deliberately interactive. We'll start with some presentations to share experiences, which will then be followed by a robust Q&A session where you'll have a chance to interact with our speakers and hopefully share your own experiences of implementing the framework and principles. We'll then have a final takeaway session where we'll try to draw together the final conclusions and takeaways in order to move forward. So let me start by welcoming our excellent panelists. It's a great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Alexandra Bugalakis, the Ambassador of Canada, Ms. Zulma Yanira Fonseca Centeno, the Director of Nutrition from ICBF, the Colombian Institute of Family Wellbeing. Her presentation will actually feature a video message from Her Excellency, the First Lady of Colombia. I'm also very pleased that we'll have two senior colleagues join us today from the FAO and WFP. Mr. Dominic Bejon, Acting Director of Emergencies at FAO, and my friend, Mr. David Cartrug, Director of Program, Humanitarian and Development at WFP. I'm also very pleased to warmly welcome a representative of the civil society mechanism for the CFS, Mr. Ahmed Sourani of the Arab Network for Food Sovereignty, which represents over 40 organizations. Without further ado, I'd now introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Kenvita-Shvili, the former co-chair of the Open-Ended Working Group for the Framework. Elizabeth is also a former USAID staff member from their Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs. She will share with us today her insights on the negotiation process and also help us contextualize the framework within the current global context. Elizabeth, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ronald, and good morning to everybody. Before I start, I would like to wish everybody a belated Happy New Year. And if I might send especially warm greetings to my two former CFS chairs, Ambassador Yaya of Nigeria, who guided us through the VGGTs, and to Ambassador Verburg of the Netherlands, who was a force of nature as we negotiated this framework. Now to my task. So 5 years ago, after more than 2 years of technical discussions using the format of an open-ended working group, that notably included many expert voices from throughout academia, the private sector, and civil society, and at times difficult but always civil negotiations that allowed us to find consensus, this body approved the Framework for Action for Food Security and Nutrition in Protracted Crisis, which we fondly refer to as the FFA. Our process, one of fostering spirited dialogue, collective ownership, and shared responsibility, is reflected within the words of the FFA. The evidence-based policy framework we approved then remains highly relevant today as an effective instrument at global, national, and local levels. Indeed, the FFA is reflected in global discussions in the context of the humanitarian development peace nexus, including in a paper put forth by the Interagency Standing Committee on this topic, as well as the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit. I would like to remind the audience that the FFA is a rather unique action-oriented document, which through 11 interrelated principles highlights the need for political action and hence high-level political commitment to effect positive change. It provides guidance to policymakers to do so, proposes distinct processes for transforming host country policies, investments, and institutional arrangements towards addressing food insecurity and malnutrition in a protracted crisis situation, importantly in a whole of community fashion. The FFA purposely uses the term stakeholder in a broad sense, implying collective responsibility for action in several of the principles, although clearly in some instances, lead responsibilities may rest with host governments and institutions. We remain stakeholders to the extent that we all have responsibility to remind our senior policymakers of the principle's continued relevance today, when communities affected by protracted crisis are perhaps even more vulnerable and prone to food insecurity. We as practitioners must therefore learn to program in ways that address food insecurity and malnutrition and use the tools available to us, including importantly, this framework. The principles describe how to address critical food insecurity and undernutrition manifestations and build resilience in protracted crisis situations in a manner that is adapted to specific challenges of these situations, including by focusing on the need to protect those affected by or at risk from protracted crisis situations, by elevating the role of women and girls, and avoid exacerbating underlying causes of food insecurity and undernutrition, and instead, where opportunities exist, contribute towards resolving them. I was proud then and remain so today to be associated with this remarkable accomplishment. Foremost in my mind, we identified in a number of principles issues and approaches that were at the time not recognized as critical. I would suggest that we were quite prescient, or at least brought together some emerging strands of thinking. For example, the recognition that shocks and stresses are perennial features of these protracted crisis situations and not anomalies, and from this, recognize that investment to reduce and manage risk, build adaptive capacity, and facilitate inclusive growth is necessary. This was a relatively new concept that today is seen globally in efforts to build resilience in communities and link across the triple nexus. Further, the sequencing, layering, and integration or blending of humanitarian and development partners, analysis, programs, and funding to comprehensively address the underlying causes of recurrent crisis while simultaneously managing the risk inherent in working in places subject to recurrent crisis is understood today to be a basic starting premise, unlike in the past when actions were sequenced one after the other. Whether in the Sahel or Colombia, many host governments, donors, and implementing partners have understood that the Band-Aid approach of the 20th century no longer fits. To be fit for purpose, to be modern and 21st century, our collective approach as called for in the FFA requires us to go deeper and address where possible social and political inequities, ethnic disputes, resource competition, maybe climate-related changes, those context-specific issues which prevent communities from attaining a measure of food security, even in the midst of a protracted crisis. blending different types of assistance through a whole of implementing partner approach. And despite our differences in opinion on some issues, such as what is a protracted crisis and how support to food security and livelihoods can contribute to peace, we were able to reach across the aisle and find consensus, which seems to be a practice that has been increasingly challenged in recent years. I recall the extraordinary efforts colleagues from Argentina and Russia, Mexico, the CSM, and others undertook to help my co-chair, Ambassador Josephine Gaita of Kenya, and me find consensus. We collectively demonstrated the positive role a multi-stakeholder policy convergence process can have, and importantly, the value of this particular forum. As an aside, having Ambassador Verberg in the background as an ally and a gentle enforcer didn't hurt either. The leadership shown by this body, the CFS, in adopting the FFA was, moreover, at the time, part of the broader international effort to reform the emergency humanitarian response system, which was and perhaps remains either broken, according to some observers, or overwhelmed and perhaps out of tune with current realities on the ground, according to others. The 2016 World Humanitarian Summit called for changes in the way implementing organizations, including the RBAs, and countries, donors, and recipients alike, think about, program against, and respond to a myriad of crises. The FFA is a prime example of a collective effort to map out a more strategic way of addressing protracted crisis. We know, for example, food insecurity can no longer simply be dealt with by providing food aid. As noted in the framework and suggested by evidence-based analysis, which is Principle 6 of the framework, the use of cash transfers suggests a better alignment with what people need and increases transparency of what is being delivered. Over the past decade, the very nature of humanitarian assistance has adapted to the more complex and protracted nature of crisis. As called for in the FFA, humanitarian assistance has moved beyond response to shocks to expanding to address chronic emergency vulnerability. Risk reduction and early recovery can contribute to building resilience. These concepts are touched upon in the FFA, again, somewhat ahead of their time. USAID's current food security efforts to reduce global poverty, hunger, and malnutrition has an increased focus on risk management and resilience to break the cycle of chronic vulnerability, poverty, hunger, and water insecurity. Resilience is built through, among other things, food security. The U.S. approach is context-specific, as called for in the FFA, and does not seek to put a prescribed response in place. Appropriate responses and investments are dependent on the country context, including the variations at the subnational level. An example of an integrated approach that draws heavily from the FFA principles. Let me close by saying that the FFA is just that, a framework against which we should work to address food insecurity and undernutrition. It is not a guarantee of success, nor is it a tool that can be called upon to fix what is essentially a failure of the international community to address the underlying causes of a protracted crisis, as called for in the FFA. Coming perhaps at just the right moment, the FFA was an important consultative process, an inclusive process that brought together disparate strands of thinking and action into a single negotiated document. Just over 5 years, we can see the DNA of the FFA in global dialogues and, more importantly, operational changes on the ground in protracted crisis. Despite an increased burden in these contexts, there is better coordination among players on the ground. Analytical capacity has improved, and the focus on resilience is making a difference. 5 years on, we can be proud of what we achieved and how it has influenced our thinking and our work. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. Ronald, back to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and particularly thank you for setting the context, and particularly some of the thinking that went into the development of the framework all those years ago. Particularly also appreciated you highlighting how forward-thinking the framework actually was and its relevance still today. It's particularly, I think, inspiring to see how such a global policy convergence, no matter how challenging, can support really tangible improvements in food and nutrition security, particularly for those that are most vulnerable. It gives me pleasure now to turn to our next speaker, who will provide an illustration of how this convergence can translate into concrete action and results on the ground. So it gives me great pleasure to call on Her Excellency, Ambassador Bugaliskas of Canada. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Ron. Let me just first thank again Ms. Kvitashvili very much for providing that excellent context. And what I'm hoping to show you is that we benefited enormously from that framework in developing this resilience initiative, as we like to call it, and took many of those principles and tried to operationalize them in the field. And we are about 2/3 the way, I suppose, and we'll be able to give you some feedback on what has worked and where we need perhaps a bit more work. If you'll permit me, I'm just going to say a few words in French, and then the rest of my presentation will be in English. Je suis très contente d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Il s'agit d'un moment opportun pour parler de la sécurité alimentaire et de la nutrition des populations touchées par les crises prolongées, sachant qu'elles sont devenues la nouvelle norme. Ces dernières années, près de 90% de l'aide humanitaire va désormais à des crises prolongées dont les besoins humanitaires croissants dépassent le financement de l'action humanitaire. And unfortunately, we've seen a continued deterioration in food security over recent years, with COVID, of course, in this past year exacerbating the situation to a breaking point, unfortunately, in some countries. Collaboration is essential if we are to tackle these interconnected challenges and multiple shocks and to find sustainable solutions to end hunger. So in light of this, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the Canada RBA Resilience Initiative with you and to highlight some of its synergies with the CFS Framework for Action. Indeed, the initiative, as I said, incorporated many of the FAA principles and provides important evidence and feedback. So what is the Resilience Initiative? It was first explored between Canada and the Rome-based agencies during the summer of 2015, as we were encouraging the RBAs to work more collaboratively and effectively on the ground. The idea of the Resilience Initiative was that more effective collaboration between the RBAs would allow us to better address the root causes of food insecurity and malnutrition, while continuing to respond, of course, to the immediate needs. And since the very first discussions, the initiative has been grounded in the principles and approaches promoted in both the RBA Conceptual Framework on Resilience and the CFS Framework for Action, also adopted in 2015. So it was a very propitious year. The Resilience Initiative was formally launched in 2017 as a 50 million joint pilot partnership with FAO, IFAD, and WFP over 5 years, targeting over 165,000 vulnerable women, men, girls, and boys in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Niger, and Somalia. At its core, the Resilience Initiative aims to decrease the dependence of vulnerable communities on humanitarian assistance, reduce the cost of meeting those needs, as well as offer lessons learned at the institutional level. So what are the linkages with the CFS Framework for Action? Concretely, many of the 11 principles of the CFS Framework have been directly or indirectly incorporated into the key features of the initiative. This can be seen in the fact that we gave a 5-year time frame, that it is gender responsive, it has consideration of both short, medium, and long-term needs concurrently, and it directly, are you able to hear? All right. And the direct participation of vulnerable communities and other stakeholders in both its design and implementation. So there are 4 issues I'd like to specifically focus on to illustrate how the principles remain relevant and are being operationalized through the Resilience Initiative. Considering the principles of the framework for action in an integrated, coherent, and systemic way is essential, as no single one principle would actually work in isolation. It's not just about humanitarian response, of course, and gender equality, or even innovative financing or sustainable management of natural resources. It's about all of them. And the Resilience Initiative demonstrates that a highly integrated approach is possible. So how did the initiative leverage the interconnection between the 11 principles? As I said, we targeted some 30,000 households in protracted crises with multi-year humanitarian funding over a 5-year time frame, with a focus on food security and nutrition, including nutrition-sensitive and nutrition-specific activities. We built ownership through communities by strengthening their local capacity and through comprehensive joint analysis and participatory planning processes. And by keeping a focus on gender responsiveness through implementing activities that take into account women and men participation without negatively impacting on their daily livelihood activities and household roles. The initiative integrated women's empowerment by ensuring their participation in decision-making in all of the community consultative processes, promoting their access to and ownership of assets, creating women's groups to manage resources, and establishing Demetra listening clubs, and provided women and girls literacy classes, amongst other activities. By combining these activities with technical, social, and financial training for the benefit of the same households and communities, and we took into account the strong interrelation between nutrition, adult literacy, women and girl empowerment, diversification of livelihoods, access to productive capitals. So as I said, a totally integrated approach. Second, and something you touched on, Elizabeth, the need to adapt to local contexts. Adaptation to the local context is a key component to the success of the Resilience Initiative, building as much as possible on existing tools, structures, and systems, and not duplicating or reinventing things. For example, we use the WFP's existing 3-pronged approach, allowing for a successful participatory approach to the design and planning of the program, involving food insecure populations both as beneficiaries and, more importantly, as members of community groups supported by the program. Other examples, including working with existing community-based civil society organization and agricultural cooperatives in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and using local community-based approaches for the prevention and treatment of acute malnutrition in both Niger and Somalia. Thirdly is the benefit of a multi-stakeholder approach. The Resilience Initiative took a multi-stakeholder approach in its design and its implementation. Though led by UN agencies at various stages, it has relied on a number of different stakeholders, including governments, local authorities, communities, civil society organizations, academia, and private sector actors at the local level. These actors all bring their own specific approaches, interests, and focus. For instance, the partnership with academia, in line with Principle 6 of the FFA, to ensure and support comprehensive evidence-based analysis. This has allowed us to develop some research on the drivers, the impact, and the community's perceptions of conflict in the DRC. It's also contributed to inform the targeting approach and the design of the activities. And it helped us to inform discussions on specific considerations related to conflict for the analysis and measurement of resilience. Additional examples of strengthened collaboration include the setting up of a WFP FAO resilience unit in Kinshasa, which is pooling resources to do joint planning, fundraising, and communication. Fourth, I would like to talk about the need for ensuring ongoing flexibility to evolve as the crisis evolves. Implementing a program over 5 years in context of protracted crisis with recurrent shocks and stressors, unpredictable events, including conflict, is simply not possible without frequently adjusting the approach when context changes and calls for it. The DRC, Niger, and Somalia are in situations of protracted crisis for different reasons. The slow onset of recurrent shocks, such as climate-related, or by quick onset sudden shocks, such as conflict. Regular consultations based on real partnerships and collaboration were instrumental to address challenges and constraints faced in the programming. In conclusion, helping meet the acute needs of vulnerable populations through food and cash assistance so that they can feed themselves and their family remains crucial. However, this short-term support needs to be coupled with strategies to decrease humanitarian needs in the long run and help them to be more resilient to shocks. And so we're so fortunate, as I said, that in 2015, both the RBA Conceptual Framework on Resilience and the CFS Framework for Action were adopted. And this triggered the discussions that led to the Resilience Initiative. The project shows how programming is strengthened when the 11 principles and the learning aspects are incorporated in a holistic way right from the outset with a view to achieving greater impact. And since 2015, the concept of resilience has spread broadly and has become central in both humanitarian and development spheres. New concepts have also emerged, some of which were already anticipated, and yes, you were prescient, Elizabeth, in the CFS Framework for Action and the RBA Framework, such as the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus and the new way of working. More importantly, these concepts are now part of a global policy discussion to change our way of doing business and to innovate in support of affected populations in crises that are increasingly complex, oftentimes transnational, recurrent, and at risk, of course, of protraction and exacerbated by environmental degradation and climate change. A little later, I think in the program, we're going to have an opportunity to show a short video on resilience, on the Resilience Initiative from March 2018. I'll be very excited to see this because despite my keen interest in the project, I've not had an opportunity to actually visit it. So when we move to the next part, after the other speakers to questions, I'll certainly be delighted to answer any and all that I can, but I'll also be looking for some assistance from those in the audience, like Dominique Bergeron, Etienne Juvenon, Scott Roncini, and Adrienne Del Torto, who actually have some great experience on the ground to share with you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Elizabeth, for this great initiative.
Thank you, Ambassador, and particularly thank you for highlighting the importance of integration and multi-stakeholder approaches in adopting the FFA principles. I also very much appreciated you highlighting the criticality of contextualizing these to local contexts. It's great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Her Excellency Maria Juliana Ruiz Sandoval, the First Lady of the Republic of Colombia, who shared with us a video message. This will be followed by a presentation by Dr. Zulma Fonseca, Nutrition Director at the Colombian Institute for Family Wellbeing, and she'll be highlighting the Government of Colombia's experience in applying the CFS FFA. I kindly request the Secretariat to please proceed with the video of the First Lady. Thank you.
Hola, quiero enviar un saludo muy especial a todos los participantes en este panel que nos convocan a la distancia. Y es que es un honor poder acompañarlos y tener la oportunidad junto a Zulma Fonseca, líder de la Dirección de Nutrición del Instituto Colombiano de Bienestar Familiar, de poder compartirles en qué consiste el plan de trabajo contra la desnutrición y uno más, y cómo se han implementado los principios del marco de acción definidos por el Cfs para la seguridad alimentaria y la nutrición en crisis prolongada. Como primera dama de Colombia, definí mi gestión a la luz del ODS 10 y he puesto un énfasis muy especial en la nutrición como punto de partida. Y lo he hecho considerando la nutrición en dos ejes, la nutrición del cuerpo y la nutrición del alma, siempre promoviendo el trabajo colaborativo, propositivo y con objetivos determinados. Eso hemos logrado plasmarlo en la Gran Alianza por la Nutrición, que ha sido liderada por la Consejería Presidencial para la Niñez y la Adolescencia, y que ha logrado posicionar la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional como una causa nacional. Lo ha hecho, además, con un propósito muy claro, y es unir esfuerzos, voluntades y recursos de diferentes sectores para ampliar la oferta de micronutrientes que le aportan a las mujeres gestantes, a la madre lactante, al desarrollo cognitivo, físico y social de los niños y adolescentes, y enfocándose en dos objetivos muy claros: combatir y erradicar progresivamente el indicador de muertes por desnutrición en el país, y segundo, fortalecer la seguridad alimentaria en el hogar. La experiencia que hoy presentamos se enmarca en ese primer gran objetivo y los avances que hemos tenido en términos de vidas salvadas, recuperadas y sobre todo el resultado de un trabajo intersectorial intenso, pertinente, de un incremento en los esfuerzos para llegar a las zonas con mayor afectación y más dispersas, cerrando brechas. Los resultados que van a conocer a nosotros nos motivan profundamente, no nos satisfacen, pero nos animan. Por eso, seguiremos trabajando con toda la determinación, porque priorizar las acciones de nutrición que beneficien nuestro capital humano es contribuir al desarrollo económico y social de nuestros países.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I'd now like to invite Dr. Zulma to take the floor. Dr. Zulma, the floor is yours.
Muy buenos días para todos. Quisiera compartir mi pantalla, si me lo permiten. Gracias. Para nosotros, como lo mencionó nuestra primera dama, es muy importante y muy gratificante que el Comité Internacional de Seguridad Alimentaria nos permita compartir esta experiencia que ha tenido el país frente a la implementación de acciones que se adaptan de una manera muy importante frente a esos principios del marco de acción del Comité de Seguridad Alimentaria y Nutrición para las Crisis Prolongadas, representado en este plan de trabajo contra la desnutrición. Por supuesto, esto lo estamos trabajando de una forma intersectorial, como ya lo mencionó nuestra primera dama, y parte del hecho de que desafortunadamente en el país mueren al año aproximadamente 300 niños por causas asociadas a la desnutrición, y cuando inició particularmente este gobierno se identificó que se presentaba un incremento de la mortalidad asociado pues a diferentes factores estructurales e intermedios que bien conocemos son en su mayoría prevenibles y que podíamos afectar con la consolidación del trabajo conjunto. Lo que se hizo inicialmente fue la identificación de cuáles eran esos territorios donde se presentaba con mayores tasas la mortalidad por y asociada a desnutrición, y se inició un trabajo conjunto con el fin de disminuir esas muertes por y asociadas a desnutrición. Todo esto en el trabajo asociado a la Gran Alianza por la Nutrición, que como lo mencionamos también es liderada directamente por la primera dama de la nación, y lo que le ha dado un posicionamiento muy importante y un respaldo que ha permitido que se implemente tanto a nivel nacional como en los territorios. Aquí hemos definido 5 objetivos principales sobre los que se está trabajando con el fin de lograr una articulación frente a quienes realizan las acciones específicas de atención a la desnutrición y quienes estamos trabajando también por el tema de la prevención. La idea era poder fortalecer la identificación de los casos, principalmente en esas zonas más alejadas del país. Segundo, fortalecer la atención oportuna, que en realidad los niños que identificáramos con la desnutrición aguda, moderada y severa recibieran la atención que requieren. Fortalecer a los equipos técnicos que desarrollan los procesos de atención. Apoyar y fomentar todo el tema de acuerdos intersectoriales como parte fundamental de este proceso. Lo que podemos ver es cómo perfectamente el plan contra la desnutrición se adapta a estos principios. En el primer principio de atender a las necesidades humanitarias inmediatas y aumentar la resiliencia, pues partimos de la alianza por la nutrición, donde hemos focalizado las acciones y en coordinación con las diferentes entidades del gobierno que trabajan en diferentes niveles por la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional, así como un apoyo fundamental por parte de los organismos internacionales para lograr esa asistencia humanitaria inmediata, especialmente también asociada a un problema migratorio muy importante que estaba viviendo el país en el año 2019, donde identificamos una gran cantidad de niños migrantes, en su gran mayoría venezolanos, que estaban falleciendo en el país por causas asociadas a la desnutrición. Y acompañado de esto de todo un proceso de fortalecimiento técnico, tanto de los profesionales y de los agentes educativos del Instituto Colombiano de Bienestar Familiar, como de los profesionales en salud que realizan la atención. Frente a centrarse en las necesidades, y creo que es parte de los resultados que hay que destacar, por supuesto, era la identificación, como lo decía, de esos niños y de esas zonas donde se presentaba la problemática en mayor medida. Y por esta razón, pues hemos tenido unos logros muy importantes. En el 2019 logramos una disminución de la mortalidad por y asociada de la notificación mayor al 5%, y para el año 2020 tenemos en este momento, aunque hace falta el cierre del periodo, una disminución del 37.6% en la notificación de casos de mortalidad por y asociada a desnutrición. Frente al principio de llegar a las poblaciones más afectadas, iniciamos en 7 territorios del país donde la situación era más crítica. Hemos venido trabajando de la mano con los territorios, con los gobiernos locales, para implementar esas acciones y esa articulación propuesta desde el nivel nacional, para llegar en este momento a 11 departamentos, y tenemos previsto la ampliación a 3 territorios más, donde se presenta con mayor frecuencia esta problemática. Frente a la necesidad de proteger a las personas más afectadas, en el principio 4, lo primero que hicimos fue fortalecer todo el proceso de identificación y captación de casos. Cada una de las entidades que trabajan en diferentes medidas por la seguridad alimentaria propuso acciones como llegar con algo que hemos denominado unidades de búsqueda activa a las zonas más dispersas, para hacer, a través de tamizajes de peso y talla y medición de circunferencia del brazo, la identificación de niños con desnutrición aguda, moderada y severa, niños con riesgo de desnutrición aguda, moderada y severa, y mujeres gestantes con bajo peso para la edad gestacional, para poder hacer toda la articulación para que salud, nuestro sector salud, pueda atender a estos niños, o los que están en riesgo y las mujeres gestantes en riesgo, vincularlas a otra oferta de servicios de programas sociales que previenen la desnutrición, y de esta manera contribuir efectivamente a disminuir esa mortalidad por y asociada a la desnutrición. Han salido también normativas que permiten fortalecer la atención, garantizar que efectivamente los niños reciban la atención establecida, que se cumpla con los lineamientos de atención, tanto desde el nivel nacional como a nivel local, y efectivamente lograr la recuperación de estos niños y salvar sus vidas. Y se han desarrollado diferentes programas sociales, además de, por ejemplo, estas unidades de búsqueda activa, que buscan prevenir las diferentes causas asociadas, y donde un punto particular es fortalecer la práctica de la lactancia materna, porque hemos evidenciado que un porcentaje muy importante de los niños que fallecen en el país por causas asociadas a la desnutrición son menores de 1 año, y una proporción del 30% son menores de 6 meses. El quinto principio, que nos invita a potenciar el papel de las mujeres y niñas y promover la igualdad de género, también lo fortalecemos en todas las acciones que trabajamos en coordinación con las familias que son beneficiarias de los procesos de atención. Aquí siempre llevamos el mensaje de la importancia de trabajar en conjunto frente a toda la acción. No solamente reconocer entonces, por ejemplo, en la lactancia materna el papel de la mujer, sino la necesidad de acompañarlo por el resto de la población, y pues obviamente son acciones que van dirigidas tanto a niños como niños. Frente al tema de realizar y apoyar análisis basados en pruebas objetivas, también hemos logrado de una forma muy importante que la identificación de los niños que hacemos por diferentes medios se vincule a los sistemas de vigilancia oficiales, de tal forma que logremos que a partir de esa identificación los niños reciban la atención que requieren. Uno de los resultados más importantes se enmarca en el principio 7, que es fortalecer el control por los países y la participación y la coordinación. Nosotros tenemos una comisión intersectorial de seguridad alimentaria y nutricional, liderada en este momento por la primera dama de la Nación y la Consejería de Infancia y Adolescencia, donde están todas las entidades que trabajan por la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional y que se han unido con acciones específicas desde su quehacer, el Ministerio de Vivienda, el Ministerio de Educación, el Ministerio de Salud, para contribuir a disminuir estas muertes por y asociadas a desnutrición. Por supuesto, también optimizando los recursos para promover una financiación adecuada y lograr entonces que efectivamente los niños reciban la atención que requieren, y que desde la prevención también tengamos acciones específicas. Un punto también muy importante para nosotros es poder consolidar estos acuerdos de paz sobre los que venimos trabajando, y en este caso, en el Plan Nacional Rural del Sistema para la Garantía Progresiva del Derecho a la Alimentación, se ha vinculado el plan contra la desnutrición en esos municipios, en esos territorios donde hay mayores problemáticas asociadas pues a todo el tema también de violencia, donde también encontramos que son zonas rurales y rurales dispersas y se presenta la desnutrición. Para nosotros los desafíos siguen siendo fortalecer los procesos de coordinación intersectorial, tanto a nivel nacional como territorial, lograr, por supuesto, mantener esa voluntad política para poder continuar con este proceso una vez finalice este gobierno y ver pues fortalecidos esos resultados que tenemos con la implementación del plan contra la desnutrición en el país. De las buenas prácticas, nuevamente, destacar la coordinación intersectorial, que cada una de las entidades que hacen parte de este plan tienen compromisos específicos sobre los cuales hacemos seguimiento, tanto en la mesa nacional como en las mesas territoriales, los acuerdos intersectoriales, el apoyo permanente de los organismos y de las entidades, de las entidades también que hacen parte pues, de la Comisión Intersectorial de Seguridad Alimentaria. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zuma, for this, this very vivid illustration of the value in applying the principles in an integrated manner. It gives me great pleasure now to turn to my two Rome-based agency colleagues, Dominique Bergeon and David Cartrud, to share their respective agencies' experiences with mainstreaming the FAA principles in their policies, programmatic guidance, and even organizational structure. I'd like to call on Dominic from FAO first. You have the floor.
Okay, well, I hope you can hear me. Good morning, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address the CFS on this very important matter indeed. As you know, FAO, WFP and IFAD work together as the technical support team to CFS members develop the Cfs Ffa and work towards supporting the process. It is clear that while Cfs Ffa is voluntary and non-binding, it draws on and is consistent with international, regional instrument and global framework, of course, including the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It represents the first global consensus on how to mitigate the threat to food security and nutrition during protracted crises. The Cfs Ffa aims to improve the food security and nutrition of population affected by or at risk of protracted crises. It outlines how to do this based on 11 principles, as you all know, by addressing critical manifestations and building resilience, by adapting to specific challenges, and by helping address underlying crises, causes. When Cfs Ffa was approved in October 2015, we were, as was mentioned by previous speaker, in the run-up to the World Humanitarian Summit, which started to forcefully promote the nexus and the new way of working. When you look at the 11 principles, you can see how the Cfs Ffa links closely to current discussion on humanitarian development nexus, which aims at working better together and more effectively in protracted crises. We feel that these 11 principles are all still hugely relevant today to FAO's and partners' work in protracted crises, and were and continue to be reflected in FAO's work after its endorsement. And here I would like to mention a few examples. On the structural side, I think we need to keep in mind that this was reflected immediately in the 2016 in the FAO strategic framework, especially on the strategic program on resilience, with a main area of work dedicated to protracted crises that was clearly underpinned by the Cfs Ffa. Now, in 2021, as our members know, the new strategic framework is evolving, and this is still very relevant under the 4 BEPS, and especially under the one on better lives. The CFS FFA helped structure how we were already doing many of the things embodied in framework. A dedicated unit was created in 2018 following the publication of the FAO Corporate Framework on contribution to sustaining peace in the context of Agenda 2030. Notably, FAO partnership with the Peace Building Fund has grown significantly in recent years, with current involvement in 13 PBF-funded projects, including cross-border ones in the Sahel. FAO also regularly briefs the Peace Building Commission. The FAO Director General addressed the Peace Building Commission last year, and since 2017, strategic partnerships enabled us to develop tools for better context analysis and to carry out conflict sensitivity training. All this to ensure that at the very minimum, we do no harm. On the technical side, in 2016, FAO developed a series of technical guidance notes on key areas of its work in protracted crisis situations. These draw on FAO specialized technical expertise, experience, and knowledge base in the field of agriculture, support food security and nutrition, and reducing rural poverty. They cover, these notes, the series of notes cover topics as diverse as analysis and information, gender, land-related issues, nutrition, safe access to fuel and energy, social protection, and youth migration, in order to raise awareness of the CFA, whilst supporting FAO staff and partner in specific technical areas. The illustration example of FAO's work include both well-grounded practice and more recent initiatives. Together, they show that joint efforts and combined intervention, the use of development approach adapted to crisis situation and people-centered initiatives which take agriculture and food security as entry point to sustaining peace and transformational change can have a significant impact. In terms of programmatic investments, and here we had some very good illustrations, in recent years, there has been an increased number of multi-year resilience programs in protracted crises. For example, the Dutch government-funded FSN REPRO program in Sudan, South Sudan, and Somaliland. The German KfW funded work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Canadian funded program, which the ambassador so well described, and which is taking place in DRC, Somalia, and Niger. What is key now is that we are trying to shift from piloting to scale up, with multiple donors investing in multi-year projects and agencies working increasingly together. Actually, and I would like to refer to the intervention of the Canadian ambassador. It was very interesting that reflecting on what he said, the program, the Canadian funded program, also informed extremely interesting research into the links between violence, drought, and resilience in two conflict hit areas of DRC. This interaction between climate and conflict is, of course, a topic that is becoming more and more important as we see the impact of colliding crises on people in food crisis context. There has not been much extensive research on this area, and therefore it's way too early to draw any conclusions. But in that particular case in DRC, the work highlighted that less resilient respondents who had been affected by drought were more likely to support the use of violence. I can also refer to the evolution of the global network on food crisis, which the EU, FAO, and WFP launched together at the World Humanitarian Summit, and which is really looking at, which is very much linked to the principles, and she's looking at not only the evidence, but how can we promote strategic investment, and then going beyond that, how can we see the interaction with the other sectors, with of course the peace actors, environment, health, and etc. And this is that synergy that help us work towards preventing food crisis and reducing the number of people in food crisis. I should also refer to increased investment in early warning for early action, anticipatory action, with support of key members, for example, such as Germany, which are all in line with the recommendation of the Cfs FFA. In conclusion, it is clear that the Cfs FFA has stood the test of time and can be seen in many ongoing processes and fora which seek to improve how we work in protracted crises to improve food security and nutrition. The latest figures and the impacts, direct and indirect, of COVID-19, unfortunately, show that our work in this area has to continue. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity again and give you back the floor, Owen.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for sharing FAO's reflections of the implementation of the principles and some of the experiences and results that have come out of your work. I'd now like to turn to Mr. David Cartrude from WFP, and he is the Director of Program Humanitarian and Development. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning, Excellencies, CFS Chair, Dominic, so pleased to hear you, and the other interventions. Let me cover a few points, although I'm very anxious to, as the moderator said earlier, to hear from other stakeholders and interact with you. So I hope we will have plenty of time for that. Generally speaking, just to echo what you heard in the keynote and echoed to a certain extent in other speakers, there is, we're slipping in terms of our performance in the face of growing food insecurity. And most of this is happening in protracted crisis situations, which are also multiplying beyond lists we worked with years ago. We also sadly have the most extreme evidence of that in the form of the specter of famine in at least 4 environments on the immediate horizon, possibly many more countries joining that if these trends continue to exacerbate. So this is, and of course has been said, we're facing a very complex situation going forward in terms of multi-dimensional risk driven by, we like to sometimes call it the 3 C's: conflict, climate, COVID, as a, of course, shorthand for pandemic, and the socioeconomic effects of COVID, which will go for years now. These multidimensional risks, of course, have tremendous complex interaction with affected communities, individuals, and member states that we work with in these fragile contexts. So this points to the fact that we need to redouble our efforts in applying this framework. And I would commend the CFS for having this regular engagement every 2 years and, of course, convening us today. Now, in terms of WFP, I won't go too much over the evolution since 2015. It's very similar to FAO from when this was promulgated, the framework. We've essentially worked in all areas. All principles remain very relevant. So you would have seen WP's growth in the nutrition area, the ability to work with communities on assessment work and evidence gathering at that level, as well as more sophisticated techniques were developed over this time. Continual work with livelihood, whether it's smallholder farmers or food for assets, a constant attention to women's equality, gender equality, and working on gender issues. Also strengthening ownership and partners with our member states, but also communities, affected populations, local civil society, and so forth, in a kind of whole society approach. Working on innovative ways to finance our operations, as well as, and this has been particularly in the last few years, working in the area of taking our humanitarian development, our multi-dimensional mandate, and seeing how that can not only be applied in these contexts to work to address root causes, but also contribute to peace. And you would have seen recognition of that in the form of the recent Nobel Peace Prize award. The also paying attention as we go forward to local and national governance. And I would say in these last areas, we're looking very promisingly at the issue of the Food Systems Summit, and which has not been mentioned yet, but we feel that that's another area where potentially the framework can be applied. Now, what we did in preparation for this event today, this discussion, is we, and I'm sure the other agencies did the same, did a sampling, an interaction with, in our case, 11 country operations working in fragile and protracted settings. What was interesting there is that the good news is that all these principles, and again, all of them are relevant, were applied, de facto. And so that shows that the principles are well aligned and well suited and relevant. What was a bit concerning, however, is the awareness of the framework specifically was less evident. In fact, I would say it was more, there was less awareness across these countries. There was some awareness. And so I think that proves that we need to, as we redouble our efforts, we need to also apply, we're applying this in a suboptimal manner. We need to essentially reach the full potential of applying the framework, and we will commit to doing so, because as we move forward in WFP, similar to what you heard from FAO, we're at a very important juncture, coming out of COVID, of course, and this appreciation for the multidimensional risk environment and the real serious trends on the food security front. We're also embarking on our new strategic plan. We're also embarking on the the next generation of our country strategic programs, which is a different approach introduced only a couple of years ago, which provides us the opportunity to apply this framework because, again, it is all relevant. And that would address the context-specific nature that was cited before, which we fully subscribe to. And of course, it allows us to be highly consultative, take a whole of society approach using the 3P and other techniques that were cited earlier. And of course, everything being based on evidence. We also have been, over the last year or so, revising our policy framework. This work will intensify going forward, aligned with this new strategic plan. And just some highlights there, we'll be revising policies on gender, protection, resilience, urban, disaster risk reduction. All of these are going to be given treatment. And obviously, we have a chance to not only update them to the current challenges we're facing, but also do this in a manner that is informed by the framework as it does remain relevant. Now, a couple other quick points. One is the multi-stakeholder spirit of the framework is I think, as relevant as ever. And if you extend that into partnerships, this, I think, was evident in the other speakers. Just working with the members of the CFS is a partnership and multi-stakeholder approach. Through COVID, we had a new appreciation for working with member states very, very closely and in new ways of working in terms of how we were addressing that pandemic, also from the point of view of building back better and looking at building further resilience going forward. We have exciting partnerships with CIPRI and ICG, the International Crisis Group, on conflict analysis and looking at how we have better instruments for measuring our contribution for peace, building on experience. We have a very exciting MOU with the CG Systems Organization, the CGI network, as it integrates its efforts to help us with operational research. As was mentioned by Dominique, the global network on food crisis has a huge potential to realize. And so we'll be committed to working in that area. And then, of course, just a plethora of international and local cooperation partners that we have been working intensively on in the last few years. There's a real appreciation that we can't do any of this work alone, particularly in protracted environments, and we have to work in partnership. Now, looking a little bit forward, which will be my last set of comments here at this stage, as I said, in preparing for this session, as I worked with policy and of course program design work, what was striking was that every principle of the framework remains alive and well and relevant, which is a credit to what we accomplished in 2015. So, and we will, as I say, bring this to bear in our new strategic plan, in our policy revisions that I mentioned earlier. But as we look forward, there are some obviously, we've evolved quite a bit since 2015. So this was before UN reform, which also changed the way we interact with member states at that country level, at that contextual level. This also, we have the leaving no one behind agenda that emerged later. We have program frameworks like resilience, and we now have the UN guidance on resilience just about to be issued, which will frame a lot of UN country team discussions on resilience, including the RBA interaction with those teams and with governments. So the resilience framework has evolved. We have the humanitarian development peace nexus work. And in our case, we're aligned with the OECD DAC regulation. We adhere to that regulation, which is another seminal work only a few years ago. We have risk-informed development coming back into vogue with particularly UNDP, and of course the new kid on the conceptual block. We have food systems lenses that are being applied, and we're very, very active as the anchor agency in Action Track 5 to develop a food systems analytical approach and also techniques for building resilient food systems in the face of these fragile settings, protracted settings, and so on. So that will also have to be absorbed into all this work. Thematic areas of migration, urbanization, pandemics, which we recently experienced, all of this also really was attenuated since the formation of this framework. And I would say on the horizon, we're getting increasingly concerned about water and its relationship to food and nutrition security, another frontier issue that we may have to contend with. And finally, there's been an awful lot since 2015 in the areas of innovation, digitization, those areas in particular, and this encompasses things like cash-based transfers, remote sensing, the issues, complex issues of dealing with beneficiary data, biometrics, and so on, and all the issues that come with that. So my point here is we may have at some point a need to revisit the framework, which on the whole is relevant, but maybe to catch up to how the evolution that's taken place in these last 5 or 6 years, but also this fast-paced evolution that we see moving forward in the face of far more complex challenges than we faced on the food security front in 2015. So, Mr. Moderator, I'm going to stop there and look forward to maybe getting into a bit more detail when we get into the interactive portion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you also to Dominic and participants. As you've heard, there has been a reinforcement really of the utility and the validity of the FFFA. We heard from David now some interesting points about the opportunities to redouble efforts for the implementation of the framework, but also the opportunities to look at strengthening the implementation as well. And David mentioned the word suboptimal manner of implementation so far. I very much appreciated David's reference to the Food System Summit, and I think that links back also to what Dominic was highlighting of the importance of intersectoral coordination when it comes to the implementation of the principles going forward. With that, I'd like to now turn to the representative of the civil society mechanism, who will present on behalf of the CSM the learning from their multiple stakeholders in applying the Cfs Ffa. So, Mr. Surani, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Palestine to all of you, and I'll speak out my word in Arabic. So, thank you. السيدات والسادة، إن دعوة اليوم إلى هذا المنبر تشكل أملاً كبيراً للشعوب التي تعيش في ظل الأزمات الممتدة، خاصة الحروب، الصراعات والاحتلال. الشكر للجنة الأمن الغذائي العالمي ولآلية المجتمع المدني على إعطائنا هذه نشهد منذ العقد الماضي زيادة مضطردة في عدد الأزمات الممتدة التي أدت إلى أعلى مستويات النزوح وانهيارات حادة في النظم الغذائية مع مستويات قصوى من سوء التغذية والجوع. ازداد حاليا عدد الأشخاص الذين يعانون من نقص التغذية بنحو 60 مليون شخص مقارنة مع العام 2014، ويعزى ذلك بالدرجة الأولى إلى تزايد عدد النزاعات في العالم والمنطقة. طوال سنوات عديدة تحركت المنظمات الشعبية في المناطق التي تشهد نزاعات للتركيز على هذه القضية الحيوية، حيث أنشأت مجموعة العمل الدولية المعنية بالنزاع بمبادرة من ممثلين عن مجموعات تعيش هذه الأوضاع. وفي العام 2012 تبنت لجنة الأمن الغذائي العالمي هذه الأولوية، واعتبر انتصارا للمجتمع المدني ومجموعة العمل المعنية بالأزمات الممتدة التي لعبت دورا محوريا في الصيغة النهائية لإطار العمل بشأن الأمن الغذائي والتغذية في ظل الأزمات الممتدة. يعتبر الإطار فريدا من حيث تركيزه على معالجة ومنع الأسباب الكامنة وراء الأزمات الممتدة وانعدام الأمن الغذائي وسوء التغذية. تستند هذه الوثيقة إلى إطار حقوق الإنسان والقانون الإنساني يعتبر أساسيا لتحقيق هذه الأهداف ولضمان المساءلة والتعويض للمتضررين من الأزمات. وعلى نفس القدر من الأهمية يعترف إطار العمل بأن بناء القدرة على الصمود resilience building يجب أن يعزز قدرة الشعوب على منع وقوع الأزمات، وليس مجرد التأهب لها أو استيعابها أو التكيف معها، بل ينبغي دعمها للحلول دون تكرارها وتحقيق التعافي والسيادة الغذائية للمجتمعات. أعد إطار العمل قبل نشوء الترابط بين العمل الإنساني والتنمية وبناء السلام، المعروف أيضا بنهج الترابط الثلاثي في المنظمات السياساتية الأخرى، إلا أن الترابط الثلاثي غير واضح في معالجته للأسباب الجذرية للأزمات والالتزامات المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان. ولا يزال إطار العمل حول الأزمات الممتدة يحتفظ بميزة مهمة من خلال توجيهاته الصريحة حول كيف تحقيق الاتساق بين الجهود الإنسانية والإنمائية وجهود بناء السلام أيضا. السيدات والسادة، يجب أن تسعى في لجنة الأمن الغذائي العالمي بالشراكة مع المنصات السياساتية الأخرى إلى توظيف إطار العمل حول الأزمات الممتدة كأساس لمناقشة وتحديد الاستجابات الشاملة والمتسقة لحل النزاعات وبناء السلام العادل المستدام. لابد من تحديد ركيزة السلام بحيث لا يقتصر تعريف السلام على الاستقرار على المدى القصير أو غياب العنف، ويصل السلام لدعم حقوق الشعوب المتضررة من الأزمات بما في ذلك الحق في العدالة، فمن شأن ذلك أن يضمن استمراريته وقدرته على تحقيق المصالحة الحقيقية والتماسك الاجتماعي والتنمية أيضا. بالرغم من ضرورة هذا الإطار ومرور 5 سنوات على إقراره، إلا أنه لم ينفذ بالشكل الفعال. قام فريق متميز من مجموعتي العمل المعنيتين بالأزمات الممتدة والمراقبة في آلية المجتمع المدني بتفصيل التحديات التي تواجه تطبيق هذا الإطار، وقدم توصياته واستراتيجياته الرئيسية في تقرير مستقل يمكن الوصول إليه عبر منصة آلية المجتمع المدني. من أبرز النتائج التي توصل إليها هذا التقرير أنه على الرغم من الجهود المبذولة من قبل منظمات المجتمع المدني لزيادة الوعي حول إطار العمل، لا يوجد إلمام بالإطار بين مختلف الجهات الفاعلة. يجب أن تحرص لجنة الأمن الغذائي العالمي وأعضاؤها والمشاركون فيها على نشر إطار العمل والدعوة لاستخدامه بشكل أكثر فعالية وشمولية. علاوة على ذلك، يفتقد الإطار إلى عملية ترجمة مبادئه إلى تنفيذية، حيث لم تعقد مناقشات كافية بين الجهات الفاعلة المختلفة حول توزيع الأدوار والمسؤوليات وعمليات التعاون وهيكليات التنسيق. تركت المنظمات في حيرة حول كيفية موائمة دورها الكلاسيكي مثل البعد المعني بالسلام. ينبغي أن تطرح المحادثات بين الجهات الفاعلة المتعددة المتعلقة بتطبيق إطار العمل أو غيره من الأطر المتشابهة الأسئلة التالية: هل يتوقع من الجهات الفاعلة موائمة عملها بمبادئ إطار العمل فقط، أم توسيع نطاق مهامها وقدراتها لتغطي جوانب جديدة، أم إدماج منظمات متخصصة في الاستجابات للنزاعات، أم القيام بجميع هذه المهام بأبعاد متفاوتة للحرص بشكل مشترك على توفير استجابة متكاملة وشاملة. تشمل التوصيات الأساسية في التقرير ما يلي: زيادة نشر إطار العمل وتعزيز وصوله إلى الجهات والمنصات الاستراتيجية عبر التمويل الكافي وبناء القدرات والمواد التكميلية، تجديد توزيع الأدوار وعمليات التعاون اللازمة من خلال وحوار تشاركي عالي المستوى، إنشاء وتعزيز منصات محلية ووطنية متعددة الجهات لضمان التوافق مع الإطار، تطوير منهجية تسمح برصد استخدام إطار العمل، دعم منظمات المجتمع المدني والمجتمعات المتضررة في جهودها لتعزيز تنفيذ إطار العمل، تشجيع الجهات الفاعلة على إجراء عمليات التقييم الذاتي للموائمة وتشكيل تضامن مع المجتمعات المتضررة. السيدات والسادة، تعاني منطقة غرب آسيا وشمال أفريقيا من نزاعات عبثية متعددة ومستمرة واحتلالات وحصارات تمنع أي تنمية حقيقية فيها، كما هو الحال في فلسطين واليمن وسوريا وليبيا والعراق ولبنان. وتؤكد الشبكة العربية للسيادة على الغذاء عدم موائمة الكثير من الأطر من الأطراف المحلية والإقليمية والدولية مع قيم ومبادئ الإطار، الأمر الذي أدى إلى تدهور مستويات الأمن الغذائي في الإقليم. تؤكد الشبكة على أهمية دعم النظم الغذائية المحلية التي تعزز السيادة الغذائية والعمل ضمن الأولويات الوطنية التي تنتج عن عملية تشاورية تشاركية وعدم استخدام الغذاء كسلاح ضد الشعوب، وعلى أهمية إنشاء منصات محلية مستقلة لدفع التصالح وإشراك المجتمعات المتأثرة بها، وعلى أهمية إنهاء حالات الاحتلال وإعطاء الشعوب حقوقهم الأساسية والتي من دونها لن يكون هناك سلاما عادلا أو تنمية حقيقية لأي من سكان المنطقة. فلسطين موطني يعاني من عقود من الاحتلال والفصل العنصري والنزوح ومصادرة الأراضي والمياه وقلع الأشجار والتدمير البيئي، إضافة إلى الحصار، وأسفر ذلك عن تدمير النظم الغذائية والزراعية، حيث يعاني اليوم حوالي 33% من الشعب الفلسطيني و70% من سكان قطاع غزة حالة انعدام الأمن الغذائي. إن الفلسطينيين يمنعون باستمرار من الوصول إلى مواردهم، ففي الضفة الغربية 42% من الأراضي الفلسطينية ما زال تحت سيطرة الاحتلال، ويضاف عليه ما يصادره جدار الفصل العنصري وتقدر ب8.5%. الأمر نفسه في غزة، حيث أعلنت إسرائيل أن 30% من أراضيها الخصبة هي منطقة عازلة عسكرية يطلق النار فيها على المزارعين وعلى صيادي الأسماك خلال استعمالهم لمياههم الإقليمية المضمونة لهم قانونيا. تفرض إسرائيل حصارا على غزة منذ 13 عاما وتقيد من خلاله استيراد المدخلات الغذائية والزراعية، حيث يعتمد 82% من اللاجئين في غزة على المساعدات الغذائية من الأونروا منفردة. وختاما، تدرك المجتمعات المتضررة من الأزمات الممتدة أن الخطط التنفيذية والالتزامات والقوانين لا تحدث أي أثر حقيقي لتغيير الأوضاع إذا لم تترافق مع ضغوط واسعة ومنظمة ومستمرة لحشد الإرادة السياسية، ولنبدأ بها. شكرا، وتمنياتنا وتحياتنا لكم جميعا من آلية المجتمع المدني، الشبكة العربية للسيادة على الغذاء، ومنتدى غزة للزراعة الحضرية وشبه الحضرية في فلسطين. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sohani, for your intervention today. And let me thank all of our presenters today who've shared experiences about the implementation of the Cfs Ffa and reflecting how the principles are still relevant today for all CFS stakeholders. It was very interesting to hear some common threads that were coming from all presenters today about the importance of intersectoral coordination, multi-stakeholder partnerships, but particularly about the utility and relevance of the CFS Ffa today, but the opportunities to strengthen the implementation of the framework. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite participants from the floor to join in the discussion, and particularly to ask panelists questions or provide comments on the presentations based on your own experiences in applying the CFS Ffa principles. To guide your reflections, there has been some questions that were suggested in the CFS 47 guide, and these will be put in the chat again so that you can refer to them. We do encourage other comments and questions from the floor, so I would ask for participants to please raise your virtual hands in the normal Zoom manner, and we'll come to you in order as soon as possible. I've already received a few messages who would like to kick off the questions today. So perhaps to break the ice, if I can call on Ms. Carla Montesi from the European Commission to please take the floor.
Many thanks, and good morning to everyone. Let me say that many thanks for the CFS for having placed the framework for action for food security and nutrition as really prominent issue on the agenda of the plenary. As was already mentioned, protect the crisis has, like protect the crisis themselves, we sometimes have the feeling that this document, this framework does not receive the attention that it deserves. So I am taking the floor just to reiterate once again that for the European Union and for the European Commission, we have been actively involved in the preparation of this framework, and we really continue to recognize the relevance of this framework, the relevance of the 11 principles that are mentioned. Unfortunately, the number, we are all seeing that the number of severity and the protected crisis have increased rather than decreased since the framework was published. And this underlines, in our view, once again, the urgent need for the international community to address, as was mentioned, in an integrated manner. This is one of clearly recommendation of this framework, and it's clearly our approach to act in an integrated manner. I would like also to underline one big initiative that was launched, the launch of this framework. It's the Global Network Against Food Crisis. That is the initiative that was convened by FAO and the WFP. That is an initiative that as European Union we have strongly support from a financial and a technical point of view. And this initiative is clearly an initiative that has taken a number of important steps to understand the characteristic of the food crisis and how we can address them. So this initiative is also an important way to improve the coordination of among the different key actors, and it's an initiative that will allow us to stretch the humanitarian development peace annex. I would like to underline that in a few years that this global network has been adopted, has been active, we have managed to initiate the annual publication of the global report on food crisis. It's, for us, this report is an excellent evidence-based picture of food crisis in the world, including their causes, including the outlook. And of course, we are in the European Commission, we are actively using this report for all our decisions on the financial allocation, including on the resilience building. So I would really use this moment to encourage all the CFS to systematically use this global report on food crisis as the basis of our discussion and the recommendation. We are really very near to have the publication of the new 2021 edition that, of course, as you imagine, will include a global evidence-based assessment on how COVID-19 is affecting food crisis. Clearly, it's likely that this report will again show an increased number of people that will face food crisis, and of course, subsequently, of course, we will have to face again the key question of how we'll enhance the effectiveness of our global response. We can imagine that our answer will include broadening the financing base and also a better way to address the structural problem of the food system as a way that will reduce the humanitarian needs. So once again, we all look into the food system, we all working for the preparation of the food system summit that is already mentioned, and what we hope that the global network and the CFS will put the key question already on the table from now. end here, but just ending my intervention, allow me to express also my sincere thanks to Dominique Bourgeon, that has been a driving force for the development of this global network. He has put his energy and its wisdom for numerous intervention, and we all hope to continue our excellent cooperation during his new posting in Geneva. So it was a good occasion in this CFS to mention that. Many, many thanks for the debate, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the intervention. I'm very pleased on my list to call next Venezuela, Marcel Pacheco. Please, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La República Bolivariana de Venezuela celebra la realización de este acto temático como contribución al seguimiento de los progresos en la aplicación del marco de acción del CSA, lo cual enriquece el debate y lo considera un buen enfoque para la resolución de las crisis prolongadas. Coincidimos en que las situaciones de crisis prolongadas exigen especial atención y se presenta como un buen insumo para la seguridad alimentaria y la nutrición. Reconocemos además el esfuerzo de la FAO y de la Secretaría del CSA en la elaboración de este instrumento, pero solicitamos se incorporen las verdaderas causas que fuerzan su aparición, lo cual se estipula en el literal E del documento Cfs 2021/47/3. Señor presidente, desde el año 2017, la República Bolivariana de Venezuela ha sido víctima de más de 400 medidas coercitivas unilaterales. Este ha sido un instrumento perverso, aplicado a más de 72 naciones en el mundo. Por tal motivo, reiteramos que las medidas coercitivas unilaterales deben ser incorporadas como causas que afectan y profundizan el hambre en el mundo, ya que claramente se contraponen a los valores fundacionales del marco, como son el respeto por los derechos humanos, el derecho internacional humanitario, la dignidad humana, la no discriminación, la igualdad y la justicia. La República Bolivariana de Venezuela reconoce la importancia de este marco e invita a aplicar mecanismos transparentes y abiertos de coordinación entre todos los agentes para garantizar la pertinencia, la coherencia de las actividades y la aplicación integral de los 11 principios del marco de acción. Para finalizar, invitamos al CSA a hacer mayores esfuerzos para difusión de este marco en todos los niveles, especialmente en los países con crisis prolongada. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Venezuela, for your comments. Next, I would like to invite Excellency, the Ambassador of Argentina, Ambassador Cherniak. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Gracias, Ron. Un placer verte aquí. Permítame primero agradecer especialmente a Elizabeth de los Estados Unidos por el reconocimiento al rol positivo jugado por Argentina a través de nuestro equipo de cascos blancos. Queremos agradecer a la Secretaría la elaboración de los documentos que alimentan un debate necesario y sumamente actual, especialmente en este contexto de crisis desatado por el COVID-19, que afecta de forma transversal a todos los países, independientemente de su nivel de ingresos o grado de desarrollo, y nos interpela sobre la necesidad de pensar estrategias conjuntas para sobreponernos a esta situación y trabajar en pos de la seguridad alimentaria global. En este sentido, el marco de acción para la seguridad alimentaria y la nutrición en crisis prolongadas del CSA adquiere una relevancia particular, ya que a través de sus guías y recomendaciones, fundamentalmente los principios 1, 2, 5, 7, 9 y 10, aporta una serie de buenas prácticas que permiten a los gobiernos diseñar acciones concretas de acuerdo a sus capacidades y circunstancias específicas para crear resiliencia y abordar apropiadamente las causas subyacentes de las crisis. Vemos con preocupación que las crisis prolongadas, más allá de sus múltiples causas, aún mantienen una presencia nítida en distintas regiones y están afectando de manera diversa alguna de las 4 dimensiones de la seguridad alimentaria, con especial énfasis en la disponibilidad y el acceso a los alimentos. Por este motivo insistimos en la relevancia de actualizar las consultas regionales y buscar mecanismos para dar a conocer los instrumentos del CCA que contienen herramientas pertinentes para afrontar situaciones críticas en distintos países. Sobre el contenido del párrafo 42 del documento Cfs 2021/47/INF.17, donde se destaca la importancia de la financiación institucional y el buen funcionamiento de programas para atender las crisis prolongadas. Nos parece apropiado subrayar una vez más la necesidad de contar con mecanismos adecuados de cooperación internacionales y financiación multilateral para permitir que estos esquemas puedan funcionar en el terreno. Es decir, las buenas prácticas del CCA podrán mostrar resultados positivos en la medida que puedan implementarse, y justamente la implementación muchas veces constituye un desafío en sí mismo para los países en desarrollo, que casualmente son los que sufren más este tipo de retos y dificultades. En el mismo documento, pero en el párrafo 46, se indica que las buenas prácticas funcionan como elementos difusores de conocimientos útiles, en tanto se involucre en su implementación una pluralidad de actores en relación directa con la crisis. Coincidimos con esta propuesta. En síntesis, señor presidente, destacamos el trabajo realizado por el CCA, pero remarcamos la necesidad de profundizar los esfuerzos para canalizar recursos a los países que están atravesando crisis prolongadas o se encuentran cercanos a una situación de este tipo. La aplicación de los productos, las recomendaciones y las sugerencias, insistimos, son solo viables en la medida que se concentren medios que hagan posibles sus implementaciones y fomenten además las superaciones de las crisis, el desarrollo de las regiones más desfavorecidas. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your intervention. I'd like now to call on the private sector mechanism. Oriane Montreal, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to share with you this morning some of the experiences of the NutriSet group on whose behalf I'm talking this morning, and some of the challenges which we believe support the successful use of the Framework for Action for food security and nutrition in protracted crisis in particular, and how we better address food security in protracted crisis. For those of you who might know, the NutriSet group is mostly known for being at the onset of the development and the subsequent creation of one of the flagship product, ready-to-use therapeutic feeding solution. It's called Plum Peanut. It's a red and white packet, and in just a 92-gram packet, all the micro and the micronutrients required for a child suffering from severe acute malnutrition are there for the child to recover. And after 30 years of research and partnership, rather at a large level within the UN, the NGOs, with the academia, the group proposes a wide range of products from treatment to prevention of all forms of malnutrition, and for the most vulnerable, especially women and children in particular. The historical manufacturer is based in France, but because being based in France would not be satisfactory on a long-term perspective, if we are looking at a sustainable approach, producing locally through the private sector partnership did make a lot of more sense for the family who created the company, particularly on a long-term perspective. So, and this is very much relevant as well if we are talking about our partners, our long-term partners, i.e. UNICEF and the World Food Programme, and the increasing willingness to produce locally and regionally, and for them to procure locally and regionally. So since 2005, the NutriSet developed a network of local production of local producers, precisely to aim at producing closer to where the needs are, and all of that ensuring that international standards are respected, are very well respected, particularly on the quality level, which is at the helm of the group's objective. That was a big challenge, and a few of our partners didn't really believe that we would be doing so, because most of the partners are precisely located in the most fragile settings, in what we call the programmatic countries. We have now the group is composed of 12 entities, mostly in Africa, in West and Central Africa, in Niger, the historical company of the what we call the Plumpifi network is located, in Guinea, in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Sudan, Madagascar. We have companies in Haiti as well, India, the US, and France. If we talk about the challenges, to render those productions more competitive, which is what we want a maximum coverage as possible through competitive prices. So to render those production more competitive in a challenging business environment, because as I mentioned, most of the companies are located in fragile states, which is not always, does not always provide an enabling environment for business, unfortunately. This concerns particularly taxation on raw material, for example. If we cannot, of course, the objective is to source locally, but when it's not possible for quality reasons, we have to face taxation-related issues, cost of energy, transport. And the problem with that is that at the end, unfortunately, this could have an impact on the selling price of the solutions that we are producing, which is not absolutely what we want. And actually, all of this is to mention as well the relevance for the group of FFA. And for example, this particular instances where Principle 8, the issue of financing to promote flexible, predictable, and multi-year financing becomes important, particularly for our field-based partners, whom are relying on the local demand of our partners. So the longer visibility they have for them to enable to source locally and to have to import and to have the revenues, long-term visibility, and that does help a lot. But thank God, fortunately, our partners like WFP and UNICEF are supporting local procurement versus importation, which we believe does accentuate the FFA Principle 7, for example, of strengthened country ownership, participation, coordination, and stakeholder buy-in, for example. So for the group to increase the socio-economic impact, working closer with smallholder farmers and on the value chain, we have a very good example in Sudan, where we have different examples in Niger, in Ethiopia, but Sudan is striking in the sense that, of course, if we talk about fragility, unfortunately, Sudan it is an example. So thanks to an investment in the peanut value chain in the Darfur region to secure quality peanut sourcing for natural products, thousands of farmers do benefit from technical support, and they found a market for their peanut production. So the injection of money into the core economy contributes to build resilience for the population in Darfur. The factory in Darfur is called Darfood, and it does employ hundreds of women in the primary transformation process of the peanuts in sorting, deshelling, roasting. This is a model we also have in other countries in Niger. Another one of the challenges we are very cautious about is that for the products we do propose, we do not want to harm the environment. We work closely on the packaging use to make sure the use of plastic is decreased, the use of material, raw material grown in a sustainable way. This is something we work very closely with the local communities. Even if at the end, the access and the price of the product is a determining factor, because as I mentioned, we want a wider coverage possible at the lowest price possible. So despite this price constraint to ensure maximum coverage, we do have the responsibility as producers to do no harm on the wider spectrum, but precisely, particularly on the environment.
So if I could just please ask to just to concluding comments, if possible.
Yeah. So those are some of the challenges we do have, but also as well to look on a more sustainable way to work more closely with the governments. And just to finish on a more happy note, to mention the partnership we do have with WFP, working closely on to develop products that address pregnant and lactating women's needs, which is a little switch compared to the historical interventions on children. And to also mention that we do agree with WFP on to better extend FFA's knowledge at the country level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing the experiences, and particularly the partnership with World Food Programme over local procurement. Next, I have the Russian Federation. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. I was supposed to deliver my statement in Russian, and actually the text of my statement will be transmitted to the Secretariat to take into the notes of this meeting. But I would just want to take this time to address the issue of how we work. We were supposed to have a panel discussion on the framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crisis. Instead, I'm afraid that what we had is repetitive statements by several delegations or representative Rome-based agencies. We already heard the statements of the heads of the Rome-based agencies. I believe that we need to take time here in the CFS framework to discuss the interaction between the three Rome-based agencies, how they can work together to address the issue of protracted crises, and what are the mandates of those organizations in addressing this issue, and how we as member states can assist Rome-based agencies, NGOs, private sectors in fulfilling their mandate. So I don't think that we need, once again, to be repetitive. In a couple of days, we will have a board meeting of the WFP, when the very same issues will be addressed, both from WFP and its leadership, as well as by member states. We will definitely address the issue of certain state programs and how those programs will be implemented. Of course, it gives me a lot of time today to study a little bit of Spanish, looking at the diagrams and in Spanish, and really I try to inspire to learn Spanish more. Instead, once again, I want maybe to address my colleagues and to be more focused on the discussion of the framework agreement, and not to go into the programs that has nothing or little to do with protracted crises. Well, we have big countries in the world like Russia, Canada, United States, or Australia that are being affected by pollution, by climate change, but I don't think that we have climate changes affected the crises in those countries. Instead, we just heard the statement from Palestine, Venezuela. They're also affected to a certain extent by climate, but I don't think that climate change is the biggest input to the crises in those countries. I just want to finish by saying that when we are establishing a program of work, we must focus on this framework, on the program of work that is being adopted beforehand, instead of going into the lengthy discussion on the issues that are not relevant to the work of the CFS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Russian Federation. Next, we have the civil society mechanism. Mariam Al-Jaja, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. As mentioned by several speakers, many policy platforms have recognized the necessity on interlinking relief, development, and peace building. It came after the endorsement of the FFA. But these policy platforms remain very ambiguous in their interpretation of this interlinkage into policies and actions, and their treatment of human rights and root causes. So endorsing such concepts without a clear interpretation of what they mean, particularly the concept of peace, as Ahmed has said, could reinforce the status quo through preserving underlying causes. It is extremely necessary for the CFS to coordinate and engage with other platforms to utilize the FFA. The FFA was a product of 3 years of intense consultations and negotiations with the involvement of all actors. It's much more advanced in its guiding principles. The CFS could invite other policy platforms to develop collectively an implementation plan that includes coordination, collaboration, and monitoring structures for different contexts. CFS as the foremost inclusive international and intergovernmental platform on food security should provide space to discuss actors' distribution of roles. This is what we have said 5 years ago after the endorsement of the FFA, and we would like to repeat it today. Let us not wait for another 5 years to realize this crucial step and fail the many affected communities that were involved in preparing the FFA. The implementation plan should address the issue of mandates. Will collaboration among the usual actors be sufficient? Do we need to expand our mandates? Do we need to involve new actors? In all cases, funding should be directed at developing comprehensive approaches and identifying best practices. We have observed that funding for peace and addressing root causes is still negligible in comparison to humanitarian and development aid. In fact, we have observed that humanitarian and development aid is undermined greatly by funding for obstructions to peace, such as militarization, which systemically targets food systems. The message we collectively got out after the high-level expert forum in 2012 is that sustaining conflicts around the world incurs enormous costs on people's lives and well-beings, but it also has huge economic and security costs for us all. We need to mobilize political will to move again in the right direction. As individuals in our posts, as organizations, and as governments, we can all have an impact. We, as civil society, have put great effort in dissemination and use on the national and regional level, but we found ourselves restrained when we tried to build momentum with other actors. We call on CFS members and participants to have a greater role on the national and regional level, always in partnership with civil society and affected communities. We urge governments to provide multi-actor platforms on food security that can facilitate such discussions. The current humanitarian clusters, the development forums, also coordinated by the UN, most commonly exclude local civil society organizations. We are very happy, for instance, that FAO is using the FFA, and urge FAO to ensure civil society involvement and engagement in all its activities on the national and regional level and the international level. We can do much greater and much more together. We have put down in our report strategic recommendations on dissemination, implementation, and monitoring in 4 different UN languages, and the civil society organizations and the CSM is ready to assist in taking these recommendations forward. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much for the intervention. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to do now is just maybe take a pause so that our panelists can come back and give their reflection on some of the comments that we've received so far and some of the questions. Ambassador Bugaliskas, if I can perhaps put you on the hot seat first. There was a few comments around the need for the international community to work around some of the principles of the FFA in a more integrated manner. Could you perhaps reflect a little bit on what are some of the constraints and perhaps what are some of the opportunities for this to happen? After that, I'd like to turn to my Rome-based agency colleagues to reflect a little bit on the questions around how the RBAs are ensuring that resources are going to those member states and those countries that are experiencing protracted crisis. And I'd also like them to reflect a little bit on what the Russian Federation was saying about how the Rome-based agencies come together and particularly leverage their comparative advantage. So Ambassador, if I could perhaps go to you first. Over.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. I have been listening quite intently to the conversation, the comments, and trying to understand the questions underneath the comments. I wouldn't mind if you didn't. It's just to address that tension I'm hearing between those who would address the conflict, and I will get to your question about integration, but it's just so interesting. And at the same time, being able to address the short and longer term needs of a community with regards to the basic necessities of life, including food, of course. I mean, everybody is absolutely right. We have determined that the largest source of food insecurity is conflict. It comes from various reasons. I would just make a statement of being a bit careful. I agree fully with those who have said that those that are involved in humanitarian and development work need to share more of the information they are receiving through their work, because as we described the Resilience Initiative, there is a huge amount of interaction with various stakeholders, women and men, the actual, as well as children, being able to bring that to the table to understand perceptions. That we all know conflict is really, the source of it is not an understanding of the other. And so I do think there's a huge contribution, but there has to be a line as well, because if not, if it becomes too politicized, and I don't need to tell those who stand for the humanitarian principles of neutrality, you become part of the problem. What you're doing, obviously, in any initiative with the FAA, with the FFA, is to make sure that you're providing the conditions that will allow the conflict to be addressed, because you're not using food or the deprivation as a weapon. And people therefore have the time and ability to be able to contribute. And finally, on gender, I cannot overemphasize the importance. I think one of the most empowering aspects to getting to peace is by getting more women at the table. That is why in Canada we have been supporting women in peace and security, and we are now doing a big peace building challenge, and that is to provide women the training, the opportunities to bring their capacities to bear in bringing the peace. So I know that wasn't the question you asked me, but I felt very compelled to speak because it was a very interesting discussion. You're asking about more integration. Well, the challenges, of course, are what happens in the field and the need to be absolutely adaptable and flexible. When you have three partners, as we've pointed out, that are humanitarian, development, and more science-based, to be very generalized, but with the three RBAs, you have a group that is incredibly useful and beneficial, but may need to change with regards to, over a 5-year period, who is going to be taking the lead. For example, in the project I've been talking to you about, we had in one country a severe drought, and that meant that we had to delay some of the longer term planning to be able to address the emergency. So obviously WFP picks up in that situation. Another one, there were election processes going on, and that required more consultations with local authorities. So in that case, you need the presence, and there we could really rely on the presence of EFAD, for example, in many of these communities. And of course, in others, we had ongoing conflicts and tensions, which displaced beneficiaries and made it very, very difficult. So what I'm getting at is that the three agencies have to really work in not only in collaboration, but be able to adapt the leads, as you go on. One thing we identified in earlier conversations on the project was perhaps also a lack of communication between the ground and the headquarters. There was collaboration going on at headquarters, and there was collaboration going on in the field, but the two were not always in sync in the sense of being able to share a lot of the feedback that with all the learning that was happening on the ground wasn't always coming back to headquarters in a collective manner. It was coming back in the silos again, but we were not perhaps, so I think that has over the last 3 years been adapted, and I'm seeing a lot of improvements in that regard. Listen, I won't take more time. I'll give it a bit more thought and come back with a few others, and I'll let you go on with the next speaker.
Great, thank you very much, Ambassador. I'd like to turn to David from World Food Programme. David, there was a few comments around the importance of making sure that resources were being targeted to those countries experiencing protracted crisis. Could you give a little bit of feedback and some examples of how the RBAs are ensuring that resources are being delivered to where they're needed? There was also a comment from the private sector mechanism around local procurement that you might want to touch on also. David, over to you.
Okay, moderator, thanks. And also interested in the discussion that has ensued. So let's see, first on maybe to your questions. As Dominic Bourgeon had mentioned, and also thanks to the Canadian ambassador for highlighting, we do have some good experience now with RBA collaboration in certainly more than one setting. We have the DRC. We also have German government support. Germany has not spoken yet, but they've been also very active in this support for RBA interventions in these fragile, protracted settings. So DRC, the Sahel, and the Horn are really leading efforts in this regard. But we did also, as part of a kind of in time with UN reform, as we do more concerted UN planning, and also with the advent of our new country strategic planning approach, which is a single strategic planning document per country. That's an innovation for WFP over the last few years. We embarked on RBA strategies in Indonesia, and Ron, you'll remember that effort, Colombia, and Niger. And these so far these are strategic discussions that then are informing our individual program interventions. And we just had a project approved for Indonesia, so it's already informed that one. We have Colombia coming up next week, and also informed by this effort. So this offers a lot of promise to start at that strategic level. The RBA is being coherent, figuring out who does what. Also, I would say in that discussion, figuring out the risk management aspects in case we do get, a shock or a certain turn of events that means that we have a change in kind of leadership or roles or what have you. So this offers a lot of promise from the strategic setting. Then on to an informed program design of the individual agencies in a coherent manner, aligned with UN reform and aligned with each other as far as RBA, as well as looking at possibilities for joint programming, as we've seen then in the case of DRC, Sahel, and Horn, all of which now will inform lessons and best practices for us to take this further. We also have some interesting areas that I'm personally involved in as well, and in the areas of the RBA is working together on South-South and triangular cooperation, which is applied mostly in a kind of development setting, but it has a lot of potential post-COVID to also be applied in these protracted, fragile settings that we can explore. Because we have a good base of dialogue and partners that we can bring together, and again, realize our various value added. Now, in terms of resourcing, so I would say that these efforts in the DRC and the Sahel and even the Horn have actually borne fruit in terms of the financial support. Canada was highlighted today, but Germany, US, and others have been supportive of this. And for all agencies benefiting, from that, so that the actual programs could to be implemented. But in the case of the Sahel, the initial evidence is coming out that this is also bearing fruit in terms of actual resilience building. The evidence is related to how communities responded to the COVID shocks, the socioeconomic effects of COVID in the Sahel. And there are signs that the resilience built through these efforts has helped those communities weather the pandemic and the socioeconomic effects in good fashion. So a lot of lessons learned there that we'll be gleaning. And again, the idea would be to migrate this to other regions where there's potential for the RBAs to come together and work in this more strategic concerted effort. What has not been explored enough, and I want to just mention this since I have the floor, is that there is a lot of work that's going to, I think, be happening and going forward in terms of innovative financing. No one has mentioned debt and debt distress and debt relief and so on. This is a huge issue for protracted countries for coming out of COVID. I think the IFIs are invited to the CFS deliberations, and on that front, there's the debt issue, but there's the advocacy we could do around that could also be helpful in addressing food security issues in these protracted settings. And then on the IFIs more generally, we've, through COVID, have a new phenomenon. We are now mobilizing hundreds of millions of dollars on the way to $1 billion in terms of these new resources coming up from regional banks, World Bank, IMF is supporting WFP, believe it or not. And it's in these fragile settings because WFP is positioned through this type of work we're doing, informed by the framework, for example, that allows us to be an extension of their work with member states and collaborate in terms of how to work in these, what the bank calls fragile conflict and violent settings, a kind of nexus approach. So that whole area is also going to offer a lot of potential for the RBAs also, I think, to come together, particularly with EFAT being oftentimes co-financing with these regional banks and the World Bank itself. I think we have a lot of potential to explore there to build on this positive development coming out of COVID, and it will be necessary to deal with the problems of the future. Now, lastly, just to mention, since it was touched on, and there'll be a lot of other innovative finance issues that will come out of the Food System Summit. So once again, to say that we do look forward to that experience, and the RBAs are working together to support the Food System Summit Secretariat and its efforts on the action tracks. And no doubt the RBAs will be coming together also to support the game-changing initiatives, now numbering about 500, but probably boiled down to maybe around 100 or something. That's a lot of bright ideas that will have impact on food systems, and an awful lot of that will be in protracted settings. So once again, the importance of the Food System Summit, I think, is there. Finally, let me comment, pick up on the comments from the European Commission. The global network on food crisis is already bearing fruit, but it has a lot more potential. And of course, WFP is very committed to that, working with FAO in particular and the European Commission, but also increasingly many of the member states assembled here. So that offers a lot of possibilities for working through the, with a different approach. And also as we work with member states on the planning, the interventions that have a kind of resilience lens, and also work with this framework, I think that will lead to also some resourcing opportunities for the RBAs as well that we can bring to bear to protracted settings, because we are dealing with a set of about 50 countries that are experiencing food crises of one form or another. And lastly, go back to a point I made earlier that was not echoed, but OECD DAC, which many member states are part of, has also had a very enlightened regulation that was approved a couple of years ago that deals with the humanitarian development peace nexus. And at least 4 UN agencies, including WFP, have signed up to adhere to that. And in there, that is OECD DAC. That is a big part of ODA. And the interest there is applying ODA into these fragile settings. So the RBAs might want to explore also working with WFP in terms of that mechanism that is now really kind of only now appearing on the scene, and of course is very relevant to the issues we're grappling with here today. And ultimately, there are a lot of resources also embedded there that we could bring to bear to protracted settings. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, David. I'd like to turn very quickly to Dominic. There was a couple of questions about the integration of the RBAs and how each comparative advantage can be really drawn in protracted crisis. David, of course, has touched on a few very practical examples of how the RBAs are working together. Perhaps you can also share a few reflections from FAO's perspective. Over.
Thank you very much, Ron. And one of the question was related indeed to the issue of ensuring resources to a protracted crisis context. I would like to remind everybody that actually SOFI 2010 was on addressing food insecurity in protracted context. So it was, I think, really the role-based agencies coming together to put the light on the importance of acute food insecurity in protracted context. So, and I think this has continued, and this is why, as was mentioned by the EU colleague, there was also this decision at the WHS to have FAO, WFP, and the EU coming together, and now many of the partners, as a matter of fact, 17 partners, working together towards the production of this annual global report on food crisis, which indeed is, I would say, the best evidence-based advocacy. These are the hard numbers that indeed provide the world with a technically neutral analysis of the of acute food insecurity, as was mentioned by David, in about 55 countries. And I think that sort of report is fundamental for two things. First, it shows that indeed there is a high number of people in acute food insecurity, and that many of these people sure require humanitarian assistance. But this report is also showing that for the last 4 or 5 years since it was started, we had actually consistently over 100 million people in acute food insecurity. And therefore showing that yes, we need to provide humanitarian assistance, but that pure humanitarian assistance is not sufficient, that we need to work at the root causes. Another piece of work that is very important, I believe, in terms of evidence-based advocacy is the work that are also trying to document now and working on it very actively in the context of the Global Network Against Crisis, is to documenting these funding flows. Now, the funding flows that are going in terms of ODA towards humanitarian assistance, it's not very clear the funding flows that are actually going towards resilience building activities in this context. So we are also trying to document that to again provide the world with a neutral analysis of what type of resources is going where. Another piece of work, again, in terms of evidence-based advocacy, is what we jointly produced together with WFP on this joint analysis of acute food insecurity hotspots, being able to really document almost on a real-time basis what are the acute food insecurity hotspots, therefore hopefully be able to trigger anticipatory action. This is very important. Now, David, the ambassador of Canada, mentioned already a number of good examples, and I think there are many of the good examples of, for example, the joint AO, WFP, IFAD collaboration out of this Canadian project in Somalia, Niger, and DRC. There is the big work that is ongoing also in Eastern DRC with the KFW support, FAO, WFP, UNICEF, etc. So there are more and more examples of the kind. Now, I think one of the important thing, and this is what we are trying to do also in the context of the global network, is to make sure that we document what we call the typologies of responses, so that we are now able to move from some sort of piloting towards the scaling up of these interventions. Because it's only if we manage to scale up these interventions that we know how to work together, if we manage to scale up, that we will see indeed an impact and an ultimate reduction in the number of people in acute food insecurity. And for that, it is clear that the big financiers, including the IFIs, will have to step in. But I think, again, one of our comparative advantage is to be able to present, to document the evidence, to document what works under what condition, and to facilitate, including by working with our investment center in relation also to Action 5 of the Food System Summit, to try to actually document what type of investment need to be made where. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have a long list of potential floor takers and very limited time. So I would ask in our next round that delegates keep their interventions very short to a maximum of 2 minutes, and we'll try to make sure that we hear from as many representatives as possible. If I can first call on the United States, Jennifer Chow, you have the floor, please.
Thank you to the moderator and the speakers for this discussion. The U.S. recognizes the value of this framework, and we know that in order to achieve zero hunger, we have to make sustained and meaningful progress in addressing food insecurity and nutrition in protracted crises. We therefore value the opportunity of this global thematic event to document and learn from each other. Thank you to Elizabeth and to others who've already noted our very real commitment in this area. The U.S. is very committed to helping build the resilience of vulnerable communities in areas subjected to recurrent and protracted crises. As some members may know, we have elevated resilience as a core objective of our entire government's Global Food Security Initiative, known as Feed the Future, which really reflects the reality that poor households and communities live in increasingly complex risk environments and are subjected to a range of shocks and stresses that threaten their food security, nutrition, and ability to sustainably escape poverty. In addition, strengthening investments in resilience helps reduce the unsustainable costs of responding to the same large-scale humanitarian emergencies repeatedly, and helps to shift and share the responsibility for managing risk and responding to crises and shocks from donors to governments, communities, and private sector. So one of the ways that the U.S. does this is by providing our field offices with practical guidance on how to ensure their programming is designed with built-in flexibility to rapidly and appropriately respond to shocks when they occur. So we continue to work with other development partners, including governments, on the refinement of methods of data collection and analysis aimed at promoting evidence-based policy, program design, and implementation guidance. This includes risk and resilience assessments, shock and resilience measurements, and recurring monitoring surveys. As part of our contribution and learning to this agenda, we also continue to support and refine processes on early warning and monitoring systems and strategies around livelihood diversification. Finally, as we acknowledged at the adoption of the framework in 2015, and as others have noted, political action really is fundamental to achieving lasting peace and to resolving protracted crises. And while humanitarian and development action can help, they cannot substitute for political action committed to the rule of law and to respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I'd now like to turn to the Dominican Republic. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias. El marco de acción es la manifestación del consenso global sobre la coherencia entre los esfuerzos humanitarios, de desarrollo y de consolidación de la paz a partir de las causas de la inseguridad alimentaria y la malnutrición. República Dominicana llevó la relación entre los conflictos armados y la inseguridad alimentaria por primera vez en la historia al Consejo de Seguridad. El proyecto de conclusiones de este segmento destaca que durante nuestra presidencia del Consejo, en abril de 2020, organizamos un debate de alto nivel sobre la protección de la población civil contra el hambre provocada por los conflictos. En esa actividad participaron el director general de la FAO y el director ejecutivo del PMA. Nuestro ministro de Relaciones Exteriores hizo un llamado a aplicar el marco de acción del CSA en crisis prolongadas. Fue la primera vez que un producto de políticas del CSA es objeto de debate en el Consejo de Seguridad. Bajo el liderazgo de República Dominicana, el Consejo de Seguridad adoptó a unanimidad la Declaración Presidencial 2020-6 sobre la protección de civiles del hambre inducido por los conflictos, que hace énfasis en la necesidad de la alerta temprana para prevenir las hambrunas, usando datos desagregados por género y edad para lograr una acción humanitaria más focalizada. La declaración que reafirma el vínculo entre el conflicto y el hambre motivó la Oficina de Naciones Unidas para la Coordinación de Asuntos Humanitarios, OCHA, a sonar la alarma en septiembre de 2020 sobre las crisis humanitarias que despuntaban en la República Democrática del Congo, el noreste de Nigeria, Sudán del Sur y Yemen. También, a iniciativa de República Dominicana, el Consejo de Seguridad activó esfuerzos junto a OCHA, la FAO y el PMA para aumentar la visibilidad y movilizar financiamiento para atender esas emergencias. La respuesta a la pandemia reclama la aplicación del marco de acción y sus 11 principios, por ser relevantes a la búsqueda de soluciones a la inseguridad alimentaria y nutricional en situaciones de crisis prolongadas. Por estos motivos, concordamos con la propuesta de aumentar la difusión de este marco de acción, llamando la atención de todos los actores a su plena relevancia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dominican Republic. I'd like to hand the floor now to Israel. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving Israel the floor. I regret very much what was said earlier by Mr. Serene, and I think those who knows the real situation in the Middle East regret it as well. The three RBAs are dealing from the beginning with what is important, meaning improving people's life, and not with empty statements. Israel is doing a lot publicly and privately to be there for its neighbors with vaccination, equipment, and much, much more. We strongly encourage the discussion in the CFS to follow the RBA's way of doing and not again with political statements that have nothing to do with the real situation and the truth. And finally, let's all combine forces to work for peace and food security and in bringing peace to the Middle East and the entire world. Let's work together and enough with political statements. Israel is ready to do that. I hope the Palestinians are ready as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's very good to hear this discussion on how we have been moving from just talking about talking about humanitarian assistance to really working root causes. We've seen that in the space of the last year, we've gone from 2 C's to 3 C's, and we better be careful this doesn't become a 4th C, chaos, corrosion, name it, as we become increasingly overwhelmed by this. So besides just working on the element of at a high level, we also need to build delve down into the more closer relationship that we have with beneficiaries. Essentially, the sense of helplessness, the lack of perspective is something that drives conflict as much as anything else, particularly young men who might otherwise have been attracted to more dignified livelihoods, which have otherwise resulted in conflict situations. And so in this pursuance of resilience to shock, I would just like to highlight the element of protection, and anyone in the vicinity of WFP will frequently have heard Switzerland talk about this. Protection is a mindset as much as a method. It means addressing the risks of that beneficiaries face, particularly in conflicts, but not only. Particularly the means of thinking holistically about vulnerabilities, and protecting beneficiaries as far as possible is an important element here. Protection is for everyone, but it can look very different depending on whether you are a fit man, a young or woman, a person who is disabled, you're young or old, or where you actually are and live. In one particular Swiss program, we worked very closely with households with members with disabilities and other vulnerabilities, particularly on questions of debt and resource management, something that David Katchuk highlighted just beforehand. But it also protection also requires us to engage more directly with beneficiaries instead of top-level concepts, see things from their perspective. Now, of course, asking people that you think you're saving for their wisdom and guidance in terms of your intervention doesn't sit so well with humanitarian heroism. This is sometimes something that is difficult for humanitarian organizations to pursue at this level. But it does open the door for assistance to become more an investment in cooperation and development. And this is what underlies the shift between the humanitarian traditional centrality of assistance to a more holistic, effective centrality of protection. And this is one element that is worth considering this discussion as we move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. We now would have the floor to GASPI. Kimberly Perrin, you have the floor.
As you mentioned, my name is Kimberly Parent. I'm here for the coordination unit of the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, or GAFSP. I will condense my comments down, given the time limitations. For those of you who do not know our program well, we were created by the G20 just over a decade ago in response to the 2007-2008 food price crisis, with a goal of increasing medium to long-term investment in agriculture and food security and restoring and protecting rural livelihoods. In 2019, recognizing a spike in violent conflict around the world, particularly in countries that were already facing food insecurity, as well as the underinvestment that happens in these countries, GAFS launched a special call for proposals in 2019 that ultimately allocated $127.5 million to 12 projects in 9 FCV countries. These projects are expected to mitigate the threat to food and nutrition insecurity in the context of a protracted fragility and crisis. They have joined the considerable portion of our portfolio that was already being implemented in FCV countries, bringing our total investment in FCV countries to $700 million. In this context, we at GAFS recognize the value of the Cfs Ffa and use this tool throughout the 2019 call. First, before the launch of the call, we used it as a reference in formulating the country guidelines that defined how GAFS would allocate the funding. Then we encouraged the applicant countries to use the Cfs Ffa while designing their application in consultation with partners, including the MDBs, RBAs, local civil society, and international civil society organizations. Finally, following the grant allocation, we shared the guidance notes developed under FAO's Strategic Program 5, meant to guide the operationalization of the Cfs Ffa with both recipient countries and their development partners in order to further promote the use of the Cfs Ffa during the project design phase. And next, we will undertake a retrospective review of our portfolio and report on any information around the application of the Cfs Ffa to the CFS Secretariat. We are working to launch a new call for proposals in the spring, which will operationalize a new business model. The call will focus on supporting countries' food security and agricultural development in their response and recovery from the impacts of COVID-19, while also encouraging attention to gender and the empowerment of women and girls, climate resilience, and nutrition outcomes. With this new call, we will continue promoting the Cfs Ffa and other CFS products in fragile countries. We look forward to the endorsement of the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, and we follow with great interest the other CFS work streams, which will be key references for GAFS, particularly the newly started process for the voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. I'd like to call now on Thailand. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thailand thanks all stakeholders for sharing their experiences in implementing the CFS framework. We appreciate to learn that the relevant principles of the CFS framework provide meaningful guidance for applications in a wide range of emergency and crisis situations. We think that monitoring and analysis of adoption and use of CFS framework and other policy guidelines are very important tools to measure progress on zero hunger targets, especially in the context of COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. We agree that the CFS framework needs to further disseminated and implemented at the local and national level. So we reiterate the important roles of role-based agencies, the relevant partners in consultation with member countries in promoting awareness of CFS product by providing training and translating the products into local languages. Therefore, we support continuous monitoring and analysis of progress made in the implementing of CFS framework and policy guidelines at all levels in order to draw lessons learned for improving future work and also increase the awareness of and understanding of the CFS values. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thailand, for your intervention. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we have a very long list of representatives that have requested to take the floor, but unfortunately, we have very little time. So what I would implore is that if any members, if any representatives have questions or queries, that you please send these now to the CFS Secretariat, and they'll be taken into consideration for the next portion of the deliberations, which is the draft decision. So I do apologize, but I guess it is a reflection of the importance of these kind of dialogues to reflect about the various CFS mechanisms and their implementation, and particularly to review and map a pathway forward. I'd like now to turn back to Elizabeth Kivita-Shivili to draw some concluding remarks of what she's heard today, based on the different experiences that she has, but also the interventions that she's heard today. So Elizabeth, can I pass the floor to you, please? Over.
Ken, thank you very much, Ronald. And I'm going to reiterate a point you just made in your concluding remarks, and that is all that I heard today it confirms the true value and power of the CFS processes. And when used accordingly, these tools, the tools like the framework, can provide stakeholders at many levels useful, applicable insights and guidance, as highlighted by the distinguished representatives from Colombia and Canada and our friends from the RBAs. The framework gave a wide range of stakeholders the opportunity to discuss and define more clearly, more precisely, complex emerging issues, hear out respective positions on these various issues and topics, and after deliberation, sometimes heated, but always respectful, we gained mutual understanding. We were able to reach consensus. The CFS is a safe space for discussion, and it allowed this consensus to be established on how to guide food security and nutrition actors to navigate very carefully a landscape of challenging issues and therefore better address them in protracted crisis. Thanks. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'd like to turn now to our CFS chair to share some reflections about the discussion. Chair, you have the floor.
Yep. Thank you very much, moderator. I think you did a great job in terms of moderation of the session, and also I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and also panelists for sharing your views and also your experience with our delegates and also participants of this session. And especially we are very happy to hear reflections and also observations made by the members and also CFS stakeholders, how you use and apply the framework at the country level, at the local level, and that's why the CFS have these kind of global thematic events today to share experience, to share your lesson learned, and also to share your views how to improve the work of our CFS much more relevant, and also to make sure that we can bring the policy products to make an impact at the country level and ground level. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like to ask if it's available already, Secretariat, if you can share us on the screen the draft conclusion of this session. I would like to inform all the delegates and also stakeholders that okay, I just would like to remind you that we will I will read through the draft conclusion paragraph by paragraph, and then we will listen to your comments and also your observations or your edits. We will not edit on the screen, but as discussed at the Bureau, we will listen to proposed edit made by all of you, and then in the meantime, Secretariat will help us to take note. And after that, we will have a break for a few minutes, and then I will present you a chair proposal for another review. I will read out our draft conclusion. 1. The objective of the events was to take stock of the use and application of the CFS framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crisis. The framework in parentheses. Adopted by CFS in 2015. The discussion was moderated by Mr. Ronald Hartman, Director of Global Engagement Partnerships and Resource Mobilization, IFAD. A keynote presentation was delivered by Ms. Elizabeth Kavitawili, former rapporteur of the CFS policy convergence process for the Cfs Ffa. Second bullet. 2. The panel was composed of FAO, WF, and WFP directors, Mr. Dominic Bergeon, the director's liaison office with the United Nations in Geneva, and director at Interim Office of Emergencies and Resilience, FAO. Mr. David Cartut, Director of Program Humanitarian and Development, WFP. Subbullet 2, high-level representative from case studies feature Canada and Colombia, Her Excellencies Alexander Wojcicki, Ambassador of Canada, presented the experience of the joint initiative of Canada and the Rome-based agencies to strengthen resilience of livelihoods in protected crises in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Niger, and Somalia. Ms. Sulma Yanira Fonseca Centeno, Directors of Nutrition, ICBF, Colombian Institute of Family, in the implementation of its national plan against malnutrition, and features a video message from Her Excellency Maria Juliana Luis Sandoval, First Lady of Colombia. One representative of the civil society mechanism, Mr. Hamed Sulani of the Arab Network for Food Sovereignty and of the Gaza Urban and Peri-Urban Agricultural Platform, who presented the CSM's report on the monitoring of use and uptake of the Cfs Ffa amongst its stakeholders. Third paragraph, the committee welcomed the CFS 47 Global Thematic Event as a contribution to monitoring progress toward implementation of the framework and as a useful opportunity to share experience and good practices in the use and application of that framework at all levels. B. Took note of the overview provided in documents CFS 2021/47 Information 17, monitoring the use and application of CFS framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crisis, Cfs Ffa, analysis of the contributions received to inform the global thematic event. C, agreed that protected crisis situations require spatial attention and that appropriate responses for these contexts differ from those required in short-term crisis or in non-crisis development contexts. D. Recall that the overarching rights and international humanitarian relations, equalities and justice, gender sensitivities and equality, holistic and sustainable approach, consultation and participation, rule of law, transparencies and accountabilities, and to avoid exacerbating manifestations, specific challenges, or the underlying causes of protected crisis. E. Appreciated that the overall objective of the framework is to improve the food securities and nutrition populations affected by or at risk of protected crisis in a way that addresses underlying causes, thus contributing to the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of national food securities. F. Welcome the effort made by the United Nations Security Council
Mr. Chair, your microphone is coming in and out.
Dominican Republic in this framework. I check it. Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me? Is it better? Second, can you hear me?
Yes, if it continues, two options. One is to ask the Vice Chair to read for you or ask me. Happy to do as you wish. But please proceed. We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I continue. F. Welcome the effort made by the United Nations Security Council President, Dominican Republic in April of 2020 to highlight the CFS framework during the Security Council session dedicated to addressing the link between food insecurity and conflict. G. Recognized that the framework, since its adoption on 13 October 2015, has been underutilized at global, national, and local levels, with minimal coordinated effort applied by CFS members, the advisory group, secretariat, and the Rome-based agency to ensure its dissemination and application of various international fora where this framework could be useful. H. Pledge to make additional effort to promote a much broader and systematic dissemination, use, and application of the framework where appropriate at global, regional, national, and subnational levels, supported by all CFS members, the Rome-based agencies, and other CFS constituencies, while seeking similar commitments and support from other UN agencies toward joint and coordinated implementation plans. I took note of the following comments provided in plenary. The CFS FFA is an illustration of the values and power of multi-stakeholders CFS process, which enable effective collaboration. Next bullet. The principles set forth in the CFS FFA remain relevant. The next subtopic. Effort should be made by all CFS stakeholders in to encourage adaptation of the framework as appropriate in the context of protracted crisis. Okay, now I think our draft conclusion seems very simple, and I hope that all of you can accommodate your observation. Or now I think I see Cameroon would like to take the floor. Cameroon, please.
Mr. Chair, Ambassador Tonawat, thank you. And we're happy to see you there. Let us also recognize the presence of our dear friend, Elizabeth Christavilli, and also Ambassador Bugaili. We know with Elizabeth how difficult it was, the negotiations of the framework. But we are happy that it's under implementation today. If we are taking the floor with your permission, Mr. Chair, we would, as a regional group of Africa, represented by Morocco and Cameroon, we want to give our comment on the entire proposal, if you don't mind. We don't want to go paragraph by paragraph. We want to give it at one go. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, please, please. As I mentioned earlier, once you take the floor and give some comments, we would take note. And then after we get all of our comments and edits made by the members, we will propose you the new proposal for your review. Yeah, please.
Okay, let me now continue in French. Le groupe régional africain se félicite de l'organisation de cette manifestation thématique mondiale dont l'objectif est d'assurer le suivi des thématiques mondiales, le suivi des progrès accomplis dans la mise en œuvre du cadre d'action pour la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition à travers l'échange des expériences et des bonnes pratiques. Nous avons pris note, Monsieur le Président, de la synthèse que le secrétariat a présentée dans le document CFS 2021-47-F17, intitulé « Suivi de l'utilisation et de l'application du cadre d'action du CSA pour la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition lors des crises prolongées, CSA-CDA, analyse des contributions reçues en vue de la manifestation thématique mondiale ». Nous avons suivi avec beaucoup d'intérêt les contributions des différentes parties prenantes au cours de cette manifestation et félicitons Ron Hartmann pour la modération. Nous voulons revenir sur le projet de conclusion qui a été soumis parce qu'il y a eu quelques modifications à la suite des débats de ce jour, mais nous revenons surtout, nous commentons surtout sur ce qui nous a été présenté dans le document de référence. La première chose que nous voulons dire, c'est que le paragraphe 2 nous paraît un peu superflu dans le texte central du projet de conclusion. Nous préférons que soit il est éliminé, soit on le met en note de bas de page. Donc, tous ces éléments doivent faire partie des notes de bas de page. Au paragraphe 3E, nous souhaitons l'utilisation de l'expression « réitère que l'objectif » au lieu de « constate avec satisfaction que l'objectif ». Parce que nous disons, ça c'est sans commentaire, mais on a envoyé le texte, je pense que le secrétariat a dû recevoir notre texte, mais vous allez regarder. Au paragraphe 3, petit f, nous souhaitons que ce paragraphe soit reformulé comme suite. A été informé des actions menées par la présidence du Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU, entre parenthèses, République dominicaine, pour mettre en avant le cadre d'action du CSA lors d'une session en avril 2020 du Conseil de sécurité consacrée au lien entre l'insécurité alimentaire et les conflits et à encourager des actions similaires dans d'autres forums. Au paragraphe 3H, nous souhaitons également que le paragraphe 3H soit reformulé comme suit. À endosser les recommandations de 1. Identifier la diffusion du CSA-CDA à tous les niveaux, en particulier au niveau national. 2. Mettre en place des mécanismes transparents et ouverts pour coordonner l'application des 11 principes du CSA-CDA à l'interface action humanitaire développement paix, tout en faisant participer les acteurs et les organisations ayant des mandats, des compétences et des modes de fonctionnement différents, ainsi que les populations touchées. Petit 3. Suivre régulièrement l'utilisation qui est faite du cadre et des autres produits du CSA pour mesurer les progrès accomplis dans la réalisation de sa vision, qui est d'éliminer la faim et d'assurer la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition pour tous. Et nous souhaitons ajouter un autre paragraphe. Maintenant, il y a un paragraphe I qui est là, mais nous souhaitons, donc ce sera donc après I, un autre paragraphe qui lit comme suite à exhorter toutes les parties prenantes à mettre en place un cadre incitatif et une matrice simplifiée pour inviter les contributions volontaires régulières d'échange d'expériences afin d'assurer le meilleur suivi de la mise en œuvre du CSA-CDA. Monsieur le Président, nous restons attentifs aux contributions des autres membres du comité et sommes disposés à approuver les conclusions de cette manifestation thématique. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cameroon, for your suggestions and comments. Now I give the floor to Portugal, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Excellency, for giving us the floor. I should say that Portugal, we are at the presidency of the European Union Council at the moment. And I should say that we are very surprised with the decision of preventing members of the CFS to express their views in this very important topic. We from our side, as a Portuguese delegation, we deeply regret that the European Union and its member states did not have the opportunity to express their views, and we already sent our intervention to the CFS Secretariat, so it can be distributed to all members. And from our side, we think that this situation should be properly addressed for the next CFS sessions. And with this previous remark, that is important from our side, regarding your conclusions and regarding our key messages for this topic, we would like to draw your attention and for your consideration the importance we attach at the European Union and its member states to investing in resilience building in situations of protracted crisis. I think that it should be properly addressed in the text. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence, and thank you very much. And to you.
Thank you very much, Portugal, for your comments. Next, I will give the floor to Russian Federation. But anyway, if I would like to ask the members if you would like to send your comments to the Secretariat. You also please send to the email cfs@fao.ort, and then Secretariat will also can continue their work easily. And now I give the floor to Russian Federation, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Chair, first of all, I would like to express our gratitude to you for this, for presenting your chair summary. We can go along with your proposal, also discussed in the bureau meetings. Regarding the bullet points that are produced today, we would be pleased to modify the bullet point 1. We think we should concentrate on the value of multi-stakeholder CFS process rather than value and power, since power, it's not clear what does it mean. So our proposal would be to say illustration of the value of multi-stakeholder processes. Another point is about the remarks made by our colleagues from Cameroon. It was quite difficult to understand the concrete text that were proposed, given the interpretation challenges, probably. But we are ready to analyze these new amendments in written form and make our reaction on this. But now it is difficult to react. So we are waiting the amendments made in written form. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Russian Federation. Now I give the floor to CSM. Oh no, Argentina, and then CSM, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Quería agradecerle muy especialmente el resumen que presentó a los miembros y en la misma línea que lo expresado por mi colega de Rusia, creo que para nosotros nos parece equilibrado y razonable el apoyo a su propuesta, presidente. Considerando que existen algunos comentarios y algunas sugerencias de inclusión de algunas otras cuestiones, veríamos con agrado si algunos puntos de nuestra presentación, que fue enviada oportunamente a la Secretaría, pudieran ser incluidas en la medida que tengamos suficiente consenso, pero que son importantes porque refieren específicamente a la importancia de la movilización de recursos para la construcción de capacidades, fortalecer programas educativos y el desarrollo de sistemas alimentarios resilientes. Creo que estos conceptos que traté de expresar en mi intervención son importantes porque relacionan los objetivos con los medios para lograr los objetivos que todos tenemos. Pero repito, presidente, lo primero es apoyar su sugerencia y su propuesta, y luego que evalúe la posibilidad de incluir alguna mención a esto que he expresado en mi intervención. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Argentina, for your suggestion. Now I give the floor to CSM, please. CSM, please. Hamadi, are you here? CSM, please.
Bonjour. Est-ce que vous me recevez?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Est-ce que vous me recevez? Bonjour. Ok, merci. Bon, merci, Président, de m'avoir donné la parole. Les mécanismes de la société civile se félicitent de cette réunion sur les cadres d'action et les crises prolongées, mais comme c'est la fin de l'heure, on va juste faire quelques recommandations, exprimer un peu notre satisfaction par rapport à ce cadre de suivi des crises prolongées. Et surtout, ce que nous allons demander, c'est que les instruments du CSA ont une valeur d'aide pour les États afin de prendre de bonnes politiques qui vont en adéquation avec les attentes des populations. Donc, on a parlé des crises prolongées. Les crises prolongées sont ont généralement pour cause des programmes politiques inadaptés. Donc, nous pensons que les États capitaliseront sur tous ces conseils, ces avis, ces recommandations pour améliorer les programmes et les politiques, et surtout de la bonne volonté dans l'application des instruments du CSA. Donc, nous constatons déjà que c'est la fin de l'ère, donc nous sommes entièrement d'accord avec les cadres d'action et on se félicite de son adoption par le CSA et par les États membres pour que ça puisse aider à changer les politiques et à améliorer les conditions de vie des populations. Merci.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, CSM. Now on my list, I don't have any requests from the floor. May I ask the plenaries? We will have a short break for 5 minutes, and then we will come back for the new proposal. After we listening to all of you, we tried our best to reflect your observation and also your suggestion. And then I will come back with the chair proposal for your reviews, and we do hope that will accommodate your suggestion and comments, and then hope that you can endorse these draft conclusion and to ensure that all of your comments and your suggestions are included in this draft conclusion. Okay, I think I will have a break for 5 minutes. Yeah, we will come back at 12:30.
This is the commune of Dogo in the Zender region of Niger and the Sahel. And this is what it looks like in the field when WFP, FAO, and IFAD work together. We've been working since 2013 rehabilitating this water pan, working with the community, working with the technical services of the government, cleaning the water pan and restocking it with fish. People are now able to take care of most of their food security needs during the year.
What we are doing here to remove this invasive species that is developing in the pond, and in parallel to that what we are doing is that we are supporting vegetable gardening all around the pond so that there is indeed the diversification of the food production.
So the communities are fishing, the women are gardening, and with that money the women have been able to pool their resources and start to buy small livestock in which they further invest. So there are direct impacts of this work and indirect impacts.
Very important to mention is that we have been providing also job opportunities to the youth, and according to the communities we have been speaking to, there has been much less migration out of the area. So this is definitely an added value of this collaboration between FAO, WFP and IFAD.
Yep. Thank you very much. We are back. I know that during our 5-minute break, you also have an opportunities to watch the videos of IFAD during the break, which actually, after listening to your comments, we still need additional times to make a conclusion and also have a new proposal to the plenary. I may request that because we have a time constraint that we have to finish our morning session within next 5 minutes, because the interpretation service they don't allow us to continue. And also in the afternoon session, we will start our agenda item 4, which actually there are 2 decisions that we have to make on the agenda item 4A, update of the rolling session, and 4B, terms of reference for the voluntary guideline on gender equalities and women's empowerment. And after we finish agenda item 4, and then we will convene another session to finalize the draft conclusions of agenda item 3 at 6 p.m. I hope that this proposal is agreeable by all of you. Okay, I don't see any requests from the floor. Okay, we will go as I proposed to all of you. Okay, I see Russian Federation request for the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this approach you proposed. We don't have any objections, but could you repeat once again? Shall we consider the draft conclusions at 6 p.m.?
Yes.
We have the last session will end at 5:30.
Yes.
And you propose to make another round of in 30 minutes after, or can you?
I repeat. After we've finished the afternoon session at 5:30. We will check with the interpretation service if we can convene another session immediately to conclude the draft conclusions of agenda item 3. We will do it immediately, or otherwise, if it is not allowed, we will make it at 6:30. I have to check with our secretary. Could you please check, or you can make any additional clarification on this, please?
So it is set for 6 p.m. To start, and that is a full 3-hour session. Whether we need a full 3 hours or not, I doubt, but it is scheduled to commence at 6 p.m. Rome time.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Secretary, for your clarification. I hope that is clear for Russian Federation. Is there any others requests from the floor? I don't see none. I don't see any hand. Okay, now I think, thank you very much for your active participation for this morning session, and then we will come back for the afternoon session at 2:30, and during the lunch times starting at 1 o'clock. We still have the 3 side event for today, which actually all of those are very important. One is about engaging farmers in the process of reproposing agricultural policies organized by Just Rural Transition, World Bank, and World Farmers Organization. The next, another side event, ensuring the human right to adequate food for sustainable food system, organized by Friends of the Right to Food groups, FAO, IPPC, Secretariat, Spain, and Netherlands. And another one developing effective policy responses to COVID-19 organized by civil society and indigenous people mechanisms for related info relation with the CFS or CFCSC, as you know, as a CSM. UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Adequate Food, IPES Food in Spain. Now, I wish you have a good lunch and we come back at 2:30 and also enjoy your side event. Thank you very much. And thank you all of our speakers, panelists, our moderators. Thank you very much.